It all started one morning when a naked pink-haired girl named Judith unexpectedly wakes up with a naked man in the same bed. She frantically tries to figure out who this handsome guy is and what she is doing here. In the imperial palace the day before, a masquerade ball was held in honor of the new year. It was there that she saw a stranger of incredible beauty. Judith now moves away from the man on the bed and scolds herself for having gone off the deep end as soon as she came of age. She looks at him with admiration and thinks he's more of a work of art than a person. Suddenly the stranger wakes up, looks at her for a second, and then rises and kisses her gently on the forehead, wishing Judith a good morning. She hesitates, and he asks how she is feeling. He embarrassingly apologizes for his ineptitude during the night, explaining that it was his first time. But Judith can hardly believe it. He offers to call the doctor, which makes Judith laugh. Then he offers her breakfast, stretching nicely, and Judith's heart leaps out of her chest at the sight of him. She shyly replies that she doesn't usually eat at other people's houses, and she'd better go to her own. But he thinks she should eat before she goes. She looks pale and rings the bell to summon the servants. Judith doesn't like it. Her father and brothers will worry if she doesn't come home. She gets out of bed to get dressed, but asks the man modestly to turn away. He chuckles, and saying it's unnecessary after everything she did yesterday, takes a lock of her hair and inhales the scent. He asks Judith to call him by his first name. Judith struggles to remember a fragment of last night when the stranger said his name, Theodore. Judith says it aloud, and Theo smirks, praying he remembers. Judith screams to herself that his face is impossible to forget, but aloud she asks Theo to listen to her. She starts to speak, but there is a knock on the door, and Theo pulls her sharply against him. A servant from behind the door addresses Theo as, "Your Majesty." Judith looks at Theo in horror and realizes that she has made a huge mistake. The reason for her shock is not only because the man in front of her is an emperor and rumored to be a tyrant, but also because she found herself in a novel she read before she died. Her name was Yu Hyo-sung. She was 21 years old and a college student. The novel titled For My Emperor struck her right in the heart. In the novel, the main character named Sernai becomes a knight under the emperor, overcomes all sorts of difficulties, endure various sufferings until they finally meet. Well, at the end of the novel, they get married. Judith Farger, on the other hand, is a minor character. Unlike the protagonist, Judith was born into an aristocratic family, which never loved the girl. In a fit of jealousy, she pursued the protagonist and then died in misery. Yu Hyo-sung was also disliked by the family, and she didn't like the ending for Judith. But now she is Judith. She died in an accident, and then suddenly realized herself as baby Judith in a cradle. The maid came to feed her, but the girl is beyond furious. She has studied hard for 3 years of her life, and all for nothing. Our heroine begs God to send her back to Korea, since she is not already the protagonist of this novel. Judith is destined to die at the hands of a tyrant. The tyrant is Theodore Grey Liu Voldemar. He is the ruler of the Voldemar Empire, the largest on the continent. He was the sole heir until the emperor's mistress gave birth to a son. Theo's situation was becoming increasingly difficult. The situation in the palace heated up, and his mother, unable to withstand the tension, committed suicide. When Theo turned 19, his father passed away, and Theo ascended to the throne. Shortly thereafter, the second prince died in a fire. Theo, a heartless and unfeeling tyrant who killed first his father and then his half-brother for power. The new Judith, sipping milk in her nanny's arms, realizes that her situation is dire, that Judith was Theo's mistress, whom he killed when she interfered in his relationship with Sernai. Yu Hyo-sung gets hopeful that maybe she should have met Theo long before all the events and then he won't kill her. Judith is the only daughter of a nobleman in this empire. If everything goes smoothly, she won't have to die. She decides to make the most of her chances. As the years go by, Judith grows up. Unlike the novel, this Judith is loved and spoiled by her family. She delights in how wonderful it is to be born with a golden spoon in her mouth, lying on her bed and munching on candy. If the family is not a problem, the emperor must be dealt with. She can't wait to see him. Theo is very handsome after all. She decides to go to the New Year's banquet at the emperor's palace. She can't wait to get into a relationship. So she goes to the masquerade ball. The banquet is held for all adult nobles. The emperor makes a speech and leaves, and the guests can look for a maid at the ball, hiding behind masks. As Judith sits down at the table, she asks for something stronger. The men look at her and buy her drinks. Judith gets drunk and starts to feel sad that there is not a single handsome man here. She decides to go back home to her brothers, who must have missed her, and then she sees Theo. It dawns on Judith that it is her future fiancé. She rushes to him, but the mask falls off her face, and when Judith picks it up, Theo has already disappeared around the corner. She shouts to him, asking him to wait. He hides in some room. Judith runs in after him and freezes. Theo tells her that she is either very brave or simply naive, that following strangers is a bad idea. Judith replies that he seduced her. Theo takes off his mask, approaches and looms over her. He asks if he is correct that it was his fault. Judith stares at him awkwardly for a few seconds, and then, angry, thinks he's treating her like a child. She grabs Theo by the lapels, forcing him to bend over and peck him on the lips. Later, they get into the bedroom, still also kissing. But suddenly Theo pulls away and says that's not allowed. Judith reaches for him again, saying that she is of age. Theo warns that she'll regret it, but she thinks that's not going to happen. In the morning at breakfast, Judith admits that it was a wonderful night, but now she is sorry. She managed not to recognize the emperor and spend the night with him, but now it's too late, and all because of personal lust. She falls on her knees before Theo as he leisurely dresses and begs to be spared for her terrible sin towards His Majesty. He quietly leaves whether she does or not. Judith nodded. Then he coldly reprimands her for cowardly running away after robbing the emperor of his innocence. Judith is astonished, Theo acting as if she had robbed him, even though it was consensual. Tears welled up in her eyes. Apparently she was going to die by his hand. Maybe even right now. But Theo suddenly leans over and kisses her affectionately on the forehead, then tells her that she'll have to take responsibility for robbing him of his honor. Judith is embarrassed, and he looks at her expectantly. Then she pulls herself together and says that she is taking this responsibility, and asks what she should do now. Theo forces her to eat. Judith doesn't understand why he is considered evil. He demanded a commitment from her, but now he just feeds her a delicious meal. She tells herself to put it out of her mind, because he's a tyrant, and he's only interested in Serne. But Theo looks at her with a sweet smile and asks her what date she thinks is ideal for the wedding. Judith chokes up in surprise, wondering how he can talk about the wedding so immediately. Theo calls a servant and asks what idiot thought of serving bread to a hungover man. She could have been served to death. He orders the chef to be taken to the dungeon. Judith rushes to stop him. He just really surprised her and she ate too fast. Theo responds by gently taking her hand and telling her that it wasn't her fault. It was just that the piece of bread was too hard. She thought she would meet people like her father and brothers. One day she tripped over a board in the garden and her father wanted to fire, even chop off the hands of whoever had left the board there. Then she asked her father to hold her in his arms to calm him down. She has always done this with her brothers too, and Judith thinks it will work with Theo. With an innocent face, she tells His Majesty that the cook baked such delicious bread, she will be sad if he is fired. Theo thought for a moment, looking at her, and then told the servant to tell the chef to think better of the menu next time and to reward him. Judith is surprised that it actually worked, and he sits down at her feet and gazes lovingly into her eyes. She mentally pleads with Theo not to make such eyes, because he almost ruined a man's life over nothing. He sits down next to Judith and suggests we get back to talking about the wedding. She thinks she will get an upset stomach from such talk. Theo asks if it's not the wedding that should be understood as a responsibility. She does not understand where in the tyrant the qualities of a one lover come from and wants to refuse him. In the novel, a political marriage has been arranged between Judith and Theo. If she agrees, her death will be almost certain. But it is also scary to refuse. Her father and brothers could suffer because of it. A servant knocks on the door again and says that the emperor is summoned on urgent business. Theo angrily asks what is wrong. The servant quietly says something to him, while Judith is glad to have avoided an immediate answer. The emperor apologizes. He has to leave for a while. He tells her to rest and to tell the servant if she feels unwell, and kisses her forehead in the usual way. She wishes him a good resolution of his affairs and waves goodbye. Theo arrives at the throne room and sits down for an audience. His butler Alpin notices that the emperor is in a bad mood today. Theo asks Lord Faragran, Judith's father, why he has come to see him at such an early hour. He apologizes and asks for permission to let his soldiers in to search the castle because his daughter is missing. She hasn't been seen since yesterday, turned upside down, but it's as if she's vanished. Theo replies that it is a serious matter and authorizes the search. Fargar thanks him, and Theo adds that this is an extraordinary event and that the Lord should not forget the Emperor's favor. The latter assures him that he will never forget such a gesture, and Theo lets the Lord go. He reclines smugly on his throne, but then a servant bursts into the hall and says that the girl who was in His Majesty's room has disappeared, leaving a note. Judith, on the other hand, had formed a plan. First, she had already left a note so that the Emperor would not get angry, that she was going home because she was worried about her family. Secondly, she would carefully leave the castle, remaining undetected. Thirdly, she will ask Marie's maid to switch places with her and leave the country. Fourthly, the Emperor goes in search of Judith, but finds only Marie and gives up. And if Theo ends up falling in love with Cernai, as was said in the novel, then the problem will solve itself and all will be well, and Judith will continue to live with her family, who are very fond of her. She had already thought the plan was perfect, but suddenly she realizes that she has lost her identity card, the badge without which she cannot leave the palace. Her token was found by servants in the corridor of the banquet hall, and they found the note by the bedside. Both are served to the Emperor on a tray. After reading the note, Theo remembers their meeting and this morning, and thinks that Judith is charming and that he is already in love. And Alpin, looking at him, realizes that the Emperor was not in a bad mood at all. A servant asks what punishment awaits him for missing the princess. Theo magnanimously replies that there is none. Judith just went home for a little while. He thinks that half a day is enough time to spend with his family. Judith, meanwhile, wanders around the palace gate. She thinks that if she can explain the situation to the guards and prove her identity, he will let her out. She must slip away before the Emperor realizes who she is, or he will execute her on the spot for playing with him and escaping. She is thinking about how to distract the guards when suddenly she hears a familiar voice. It's her older brother Cain, the head knight of Aden. They see each other and she rushes happily towards him. She is stopped by a guard demanding identification, but Cain vouches that Judith is his sister and tells her to put the gun away from her. The guards immediately retreat, and Judith is delighted with her brother. Now it's time to go home. But Cain suddenly wraps his hands around her face and asks excitedly where she's been and if she's all right. She babbles that she just had too much to drink the night before and fell asleep. Cain isn't sure if everything is okay, but Judith assures him that she just woke up this morning in a strange place, discounting the fact that she's near the Emperor. Cain says he'll get his father and tells Judith to get in the carriage. He was worried about his daughter, so he's searching the palace now. Judith is terrified. If Theo finds out who she is, she's finished. She falls into Cain's arms and tells him she's tired and wants to go home. He takes her home, and Judith mentally apologizes for the deception. She's just saving her life after all. At home, in the Fargar sunshine, she is greeted by her second brother, Lucin, who barrages her with questions about why she didn't come back with him yesterday, whether she's hurt, and so on. She would like to answer everything in order, but then she sees blood on Lucin's coat. Her brother assures her that everything is all right, and he didn't kill anyone, but Judith is convinced otherwise. Just then, the father loudly calls out to his daughter and bursts in, breaking off the doorknob and asking if she knows how worried he's been all night long. Finally, the whole Fargar family is here. Cain, the commander of the knights, Lucin, the lord of the tower, and their father, who has incredible power. She fears they will punish her, though it is unlikely. She timidly asks for forgiveness. Her father reassures her. The important thing is that she is home. Cain says Judith isn't feeling well. The father immediately calls loudly for a doctor. The doctor arrives and says that Judith isn't feeling well because of the alcohol she drank. The men are immediately worried about whether it's treatable, how serious it is, and so on. Judith thinks tiredly that when she is away for a while, the house turns into a mess. She tells everyone that they can go back to work. They have important jobs. She felt better as soon as she saw her brothers and father. She felt better as soon as she saw her brothers and her father. As darkness falls, Judith is already climbing out the window, dressed in a maid's dress. Marie stops her. She's not sure she's up to being a noblewoman's daughter. Judith says to just let her show her father the letter if there are any questions. She says goodbye to Maria and walks across the yard, looking for a hole in the fence. Once through the hole, all she has to do is walk to the harbor. But at the exit of the hole, the emperor is already waiting for her, and he holds out his hand to her and says he has come for her. He leads her to the palace, where they are greeted by servants lined up in rows. Judith thinks that, against all odds, she is back in the tiger's den, or rather the dragon's den. She notices the painting on the wall and thinks how luxurious the palace is after all. Theo notices her gaze and offers to take a closer look at the painting. He tells Judith that it is rumored that Voldemar's first emperor was half dragon. That is why the symbol of the imperial palace is a dragon. Even now, an occasional member of the imperial family can inherit the power of a dragon. According to the novel, Theo inherited something of a dragon, a body as strong as dragon scales, a power similar to that wielded by her brother Cain and father, as well as a sword with a consciousness of its own, the Rakion that belonged to the first emperor. All of this was what was depicted in the painting. Theo suggested going further, and she thought about the fact that having all this, he would be considered a great emperor, even with the stigma of being a family killer. And soon he should meet the love of his life, Cerny. Then Judith would be a free man and live happily as a second character. Upon entering the room, Theo begins to take off his shirt. Judith is taken aback and says that she is not ready to spend the night with His Majesty. He says she needs different clothes and gives her pajamas. Theo promises to call a tailor in the morning, but for now, they will have to be patient. They both change into their pajamas, and Judith scolds herself for making such a fuss. After changing her clothes, she goes out to him and he apologizes again for yesterday. He says he should have been more careful. Judith feels sorry for him and replies that yesterday was fine, he shouldn't blame himself. Theo leans in close to her ear and whisperingly asks if that means they can do it all over again tonight. She's confused, thinking that he must have come to her about it. But he raises his hands in surrender, says it's late, they'd better go to bed. He puts her on the bed, hugs her and says goodnight. With his arms around her, he falls asleep, and Judith panics. She wasn't supposed to have no more dealings with the emperor, but it's not bad enough as it is, and she can't stop right now. In the morning, she wakes up with a sense of déjà vu on her chest and accidentally says out loud that men should have broad breasts. Theo hears her and interjects, and Judith jumps up apologizing. He says everything is fine and suddenly picks her up in his arms and carries her to the table. Theo says she needs to eat and asks how she is feeling. Judith says she's feeling better, but as she eats, Theo stares at her. She doesn't understand why he's in such a good mood, sensing something bad. Here, Theo wants to continue talking about the wedding and when she wants to have it. Judith stiffens, and Theo casually suggests the day after tomorrow. Judith thinks feverishly about how to stop it, for he is unlikely to listen to her. She says she dared to deceive His Majesty. She is not really Lady Judith, but her maid. Allegedly, she told her mistress she wanted to go to the palace once, and she sent her to the masquerade. And a commoner can't marry the emperor, so many people won't be happy. Judith realizes she has run out of excuses. Theo replies, twirling a lock of her hair on his finger, that he doesn't care because he only wants to marry her and won't let anyone else object. Judith doesn't know what to add to that. It's May, and Theo is supposed to meet Serna at the Harvest Festival in September. There's one way to fix things until then. Judith cheerfully tells Theo that she wants to get married on a day when cherry blossoms fly through the air like snow. He is not happy and asks why then. The thing is, the cherry tree doesn't blossom until the following March, but Theo agrees anyway. Meanwhile, at Fargar Manor, her father and brothers discover that Judith is missing again. Poor Marie babbles that Lady Judith asked her to give a letter to her father explaining everything. The letter says that Judith made an unforgivable mistake at last night's ball and is now forced into hiding for fear of the Emperor's wrath. She asks them to send Marie if His Majesty is looking for Judith. He will most likely abandon the search once he realizes it is not her. She asks them not to worry and to take care of themselves until they meet again. The father tells his sons to gather the knights and scour the capital. Judith couldn't have gotten far in time. Lucine asks what the father will do. The Lord says menacingly, fists clenched, that he is going to the palace. In the palace, Judith had changed so many outfits in the morning that she was tired. Theo was angry with the servant when he accidentally stepped on her hemline. That's when she sees a portrait of little Theo hanging on the wall. Even then, dazzlingly handsome, blonde hair and piercing violet eyes. She asks Theo if he is in the painting. He is slightly surprised that she recognizes it and waits to see what else she has to say. Judith timidly asks if he was already so handsome as a child. He hesitates and briefly replies that yes. She asks if she has said too much, and he answers just as briefly that she has not. But now he seems upset with Judith. They walk on, holding hands, and Judith asks why Theo decided to marry her. He simply replies that it was because he spent his first night with her. She asks what would have happened if someone else had been in her place. Theo replies that it wouldn't have happened. She looks at him and thinks that he will change his mind once he meets Sernai. She says out loud that he may regret his hasty decision when he meets someone better. But Theo looks back at her and says that there is no one better than Judith. And if there is, he doesn't want her. He only wants Judith. She tries to pull her hand out of his, but he doesn't intercept and brings it to her lips. Theo asks her to keep one thing in her mind, even though there's a lot she doesn't remember, which is that he's not going to let her go anywhere. When someone desperately bangs on their door and calls out to Theo, Judith recognizes the voice from behind the door. Judith recognizes the voice from behind the door and has another bad feeling. The door is thawed out and her father's frantic face is shown through the hole, who is relieved to notice Judith and then enters the room. Later, Judith's entire family, herself, and the Emperor are seated at the same table. Theo encourages them to help themselves to everything they see, but Judith thinks no one can eat in such an atmosphere. Her father asks what his daughter has done and offers to punish her for it. Judith was afraid for a second that such a development would take the plot of the novel in another direction. Theo begins to narrate. He says that Judith did something serious that night, but she interrupts him with a cough. The brothers are distraught, saying what's wrong. Why is she hardening up and demanding a doctor? She has to shout that everything is all right, but she thinks to herself that the doctor can't help her. She gathers her strength and blurted out that she had spent that night with His Majesty. The brothers are shocked. The father doesn't understand anything either, and Theo looks obscenely pleased. She apologizes. Judith didn't care about her first time, but her family might not forgive such a thing. Suddenly, Lord Farger slaps his hand on the table and coldly asks how dare the Emperor do such a thing to his daughter. Judith rushes to tell her father that she is the one who seduced Theo, a misunderstanding. Cain and Lucin are furious. It must have been His Majesty who ordered their sister to say such a thing. Can't have their little angel seducing someone. Cain laments that he swore loyalty to Theo all these years. Judith is very uncomfortable, and Theo adds fuel to the fire by saying that she was the one who took away his innocence and promised to take responsibility for what she did in return. The father realizes that the Emperor will marry Judith just because of one night. Theo replies that he values decency and has sworn to give up everything for the woman he loves. Father grows more and more seething as Theo talks about the wedding date and that he objects to playing it even tomorrow. Judith tries to calm him down. She looks at him pleadingly, and it works. Her father puts his hand on her shoulder and says that nowadays there is nothing wrong with two young people spending the night before marriage. He introduces his daughter, telling the Emperor that since it was consensual and his daughter committed no crime, they leave. Judith thinks she has a bad feeling again, wondering how Theo will react. The Emperor gets up from the table and reminds Lord Farger of his promise from the previous morning. For permission to search the castle, the Lord promised compensation. Theo, smiling, summarizes that let the Lord, as this compensation, accept the Emperor as his son-in-law. The whole family turns on him in shock, deciding that His Majesty has lost his mind. Judith begins to fear that they will be branded as traitors. She yells at them to stop, pouting her lips. Theo is also amused at how funny she is at her brothers and father. She had to use all her strength and clench her fists to shout loudly. Judith proposes a solution. Since they don't know each other very well, she will start with daily visits to the Emperor. Later, if he doesn't change his mind, they will discuss the wedding. Her father tells her that he is against it, but she takes no objection and repeats that she takes responsibility. Considering the conversation over, she asks them with innocent eyes to take her home. The family is mortified as usual, and they leave. Theo calls out to Judith, and she turns around to see how unhappy he is that she's gone. She thinks to herself that she will not be mollified by such a face, and says goodbye dryly. Later at home, Judith looks at herself in the mirror and worries about whether she's made it through. She screams loudly, but she's actually scared to see Theo, so she might die before the original story begins. She encourages herself that Judith died because she interfered with Theo and Cerne's relationship. This Judith will support them in every way she can, but then she wonders if it's okay to date someone you already plan to break up with. But Theo is so sweet and kind, Judith doesn't want to lose him. She is confused by the fact that this Theo is softer than in the novel. Even when she met Cerne, that Theo was more harsh. She wonders why he has changed. After knocking, her brothers enter her room. Judith is a little embarrassed in front of them because of everything that happened at the Emperor's palace today. Lucine says it's been a long time since their last magical training session, so maybe we should have another one today, and creates a blue light on her fingertip. Judith agrees happily. One fact everyone knows is that there were demons among the Farger's ancestors. That is why the descendants of the family, such as Cain and their father, are born separated by inhuman strength. Judith has also inherited these powers, but in her case it's just a useless absorption of magic. Lucine attacks from behind, Cain warns his sister. But she doesn't have time to react, and the blue ball hits her in the back, which instantly has a magical shield on it. She is frustrated at not being able to respond to the blow again, and Lucine offers to interrupt. As she sips her water, she complains to her brothers that she doesn't have the ability to do magic after all. Maybe she should stop training altogether. She's safe at home anyway. Tusi asks her to listen carefully. There are only two types of men in the world, scum and cocksuckers. Judith jumps up with water at the surprise of the statement. Lucine continues that you never know in advance what kind of scoundrel you're going to run into, so it wouldn't hurt to learn self-defense. She has a soft heart, and she'll have to see the Emperor every day. Judith thinks she really doesn't want to see him every day. She asks Lucine what type he is according to his own classification. The one, after thinking for a second, replies that he and Cain are among the good scum. Their little sister should only know good scum. Cain is outraged. Lucine excuses herself, and Judith laughs at their altercation. She's glad they're not mad at her. She feels lighter in her heart after her workout. She goes back to her room, but meets her father at the door. They retreat to the balcony, and he asks if she is really going to the palace to see that monster. Judith tells him not to worry. She thinks that judging by her father, she is already going to get married. She asks him not to take things so personally, and her father apologizes for her having to worry about him. He says that she is an adult, and there is nothing wrong with her having a close relationship with another man. But neither he nor her brothers will ever be happy with her choices. Putting his hand on her head, he asks her to remember that no matter her choices, Judith will always remain the dearest to them. A heartbroken Judith hugs her father and confesses that she loves him and is happy to be his daughter. Now that she has a loving family, she can handle anything, even a tyrant. And the angry emperor, sitting in his study, calls for Alpin. The butler is thinking how hard His Majesty is going through. Theo tells him to get the Tears of Hysteria. It's the name of the most expensive diamond ring sold on the black market. His Majesty once told Alpin that he would give it to the woman he would truly love. The butler rejoices. His long-standing problem is finally solved. But then the emperor tells Alpin to make the cherry tree blossom, no matter how much money it costs. He tries to argue that all the blossoms have fallen last month, so we must wait another year. Theo interrupts him and orders him to make the cherry blossom no matter what. At this time, Cain Farger was working in the archives and thinking what a lying scoundrel the emperor was. He had never thought of women during his military service, and here he was taking their beloved Judith. A worker comes up and says that Cain has a visitor. The emperor enters, accompanied by his guards. He greets Cain politely, but he remains stubbornly silent, inwardly resentful. Then he does say a word of greeting, and asks what brings him here so early in the morning. Theo replies that he came looking for Judith. Cain angrily asks why he's even looking for her. Theo reminds him that Judith promised to visit him. Cain says she is asleep, so the Emperor decides to look at her sleeping. Cain is outraged Judith doesn't sleep well with anyone looking at her, to which Theo smiles wryly and replies that she slept perfectly well in his arms. The servants, listening to this, pray that Judith will wake up soon. As if awakened by her pleas, Judith gets up and asks Marie to help her dress. But she doesn't answer, and the maid comes instead, asking what's wrong and where everyone has gone. The maid tells us that the Emperor arrived in the morning to see her. They are now talking in Cain's room on the second floor. Judith dresses lightning fast and wakes up the stairs, wondering what they have done this time. She walks quietly to the ajar door and hears Lucine telling Theo about Judith's drawings of her as a child. He praises the portrait, saying how well Judith has managed to capture the likeness, and that she has deliberately made Cain taller than the other children. The Emperor says with genuine admiration that Judith only needed a few strokes to achieve the incredible likeness, and that he loves abstraction. He is then shown the doll that Judith made for Cain's birthday. Looking at it, Theo praises the simple but unconventional shape, which is to his liking. Lucine then shows the card Judith wrote for his birthday and says how elegant the little girl's handwriting was. The Emperor replies that he wants one too. He says he has one letter, and Judith wonders if he has already shown them that letter. Here the brothers show the Emperor a gift wrap that contained cookies that Judith had baked herself. They kept it as a souvenir. The Emperor holds out his hand, but Lucine yells that he can't touch it. It will leave his fingerprints. Later, Judith poses for a portrait with Theo. She thinks that he is like her brothers, and that the portrait is taking too long to be painted, and she feels sleepy. She does start to doze off and leans her head on Theo's chest. He doesn't want to wake her and whispers something to the butler. Then he takes Judith in his arms. The artist is worried. The Emperor himself told him not to hurry, whether it is taking too long to come out. But Theo says that he and Judith are no longer needed for the painting, and orders him to bring the finished work to his office. At this time, Lucine and his fellow mages find themselves in the forest, on a monster hunt. They are perplexed as to why he is so rude today, and he is not usually interested in hunting at all. Lucine, on the other hand, is furious that the Emperor took Judith with him to the palace when she fell asleep while painting a portrait. Theo does whatever he wants to Judith. Enraged, Lucine stabs the air with her hand, forming a magical shield. Then a male raven brings him a letter. Lucine reads it and becomes even angrier. The Emperor looks at the sleeping Judith and waits for her to wake up. It is torture for him to hold back like this, and he asks her to wake up soon. She wakes up and sees the Emperor above her, who asks if she has slept well. A servant comes in and says that Lord Lucine wishes to see His Majesty immediately on a very important matter. Lucine bursts into the room, a disgruntled Emperor asking what his big question is. Lucine is uncomfortable to see him on the bed next to his sister. He hands a note to Theo and informs him that this morning they found a chimera in the woods on the west side of the island. One was killed on the spot, the other managed to escape. Judith hears this and remembers that there was only one person in the novel who could handle the chimeras. It is the second prince, who is presumed dead, the main villain Iard. Iard Aswin le Voldemar was the illegitimate son of the past emperor. Unlike his brother Theo, he was an ordinary man. His mother wanted to make him the heir to the throne and therefore used black magic on her son. A hard childhood broke Iard's spirit, and after the death of his cruel mother, he turned his anger on Theo. It's Theo who gets everything that Iard is sorely lacking. Simply by birthright, Theo doesn't even need to put in any effort. Iard devoted himself to researching chimeras to gain the power of the dragon. But Theo discovered his work on black magic, and Iard set fire to the palace, burning his work to the ground and disappearing. Theo was undeservedly branded a tyrant, accusing and killing his younger brother. Judith felt sorry for Iard, for he had the misfortune to be born in such an environment. Anyone would be hardened. In her former life, she had an inferiority complex too, but now her family adores her. Lucine tells the Emperor that he would like to see him more often from this day forward, so that he can relay to Theo all the news concerning the case, meaning that he will show up unexpectedly at the palace. With feigned politeness, they exchange pleasantries, and and Judith thinks sometimes her family is nothing but trouble. Lucien says it's getting late, so he takes his sister away. She promises to visit Theo tomorrow. They ride home in the carriage, and Lucien reminds Judith what she should do if His Majesty dares to molest her. She suggests blowing up his head with magic, but Lucien bloodily says to blow up the Emperor's manhood. And then, while Theo is writhing in pain, she should elbow him in the face. Judith hopes that Lucien won't take her out of the palace anymore. But at home, her father says that they will now pick her up every day at 5 o'clock in the evening. She begrudgingly agrees. She's glad her family treats her differently than her family from her past life, and differently than in the original novel. But that kind of caring, that's over the top. She decides to go out to look for something after dinner. The coachman warns her that her father will be very unhappy if he finds out Judith has been out, so have him buy it and return immediately. She thanks him for his help. She enters the store, looks around and sees the very same chocolate buns from Camilla's bakery on the counter. She was worried they were out of buns, but Judith was lucky. She hears a rustle, turns around and sees a stranger in a black robe with a hood hiding his face. He looks at her strangely, and Judith starts to worry. He walks up to the counter and tells the cashier that he will pay for the girl. Judith tries to understand why he is paying for her. Maybe they know each other, or maybe he is in love with her. She begins to thank him politely, so that she can then explain that this is not the right thing to do. But the stranger simply turns around and walks away from the pastry shop with her bag. She rushes after him, shouting that she got the buns first. He turns to her with a languorous look, and Judith, as always, cannot resist a handsome man. He tells her she could have just taken them and left, but first one to pay gets the buns. She thinks he's handsome, but he's acting like a freak. She tells him there are rules of etiquette. The stranger replies that it is much ruder to run after someone screaming. He grabs Judith's hand and says that if she wants buns so badly, she should ask for them in a way that makes him want to give them to her. Suddenly, he pulls her sharply to him and leans in close to her face. Judith is shocked at what a strange man is allowing herself. She lashes out and screams that she can say whatever she wants. She kicks him in the leg, but it hurts only her, as if he has a metal plate there. She decides to run away before he gets angry and yells at him to choke on those buns. He stares after her, the imprint of her kick on his leg. Upon reflection, he says that she must be the Emperor's wife. He enters the tavern, where the bartender greets him as Mr. Iard. The bartender sees his smile and says that judging by it, everything went according to plan. Iard replies that the girl is not stupid and is harder to deal with than he thought. He'll have to seduce her some other way to get her to bring Verdi to him. The bartender takes a bag out of Iard's coat pocket and asks what to do with it. He replies that he doesn't need it anymore and tells him to throw it away. The next day, Judith sits in Theo's office reading while he works at his desk. The Emperor's mind is in a dilemma, with work on one side of the scale and Judith on the other. Finally, Judith is outweighed. He gets up, and she asks if he's finished his work. Theo replies that no, he's just a little tired. She suggests he lie down. Work is important, but it is dangerous to overwork. Theo hesitates, but she thinks she'll feel more comfortable if he goes to bed. Then he just lies down on the bench next to her and puts his head in her lap. She asks if he is comfortable. He replies that he is not. Judith sees that he looks tired, and she asks if His Majesty sleeps at night. He says yes. Judith says that if he's loaded with work and doesn't have time to sleep, he needs to put things on hold. But all he thinks about is the food she likes, how he can please her, what to wear the next time he sees her, and how beautiful her laugh is. Theo tells her that he is only thinking about tomorrow. There are so many things in his head that he would like to share with Judith. It is what keeps him awake. She thinks to herself that it's like this isn't his first relationship. Out loud, she suggests that he take it one step at a time and do everything he dreams of. He intercepts her hand and kisses it, saying he wants to hold her. She panics. That's not what happened in the novella. Judith says she needs to mentally prepare herself. They'll talk about it when he's asleep. Theo protests. He's already awake, but she makes him lie still and go back to sleep. Looking at him, Judith thinks she likes him on the whole. Handsome, surprisingly kind. But she doesn't understand why he's so infatuated with her. They've only known each other for a short time. It's no good if he's obsessed just because it's his first relationship. Judith realizes that they met by chance, and as soon as Serne shows up, they will break up. But while they are traveling together, she would like to maintain a good relationship with Theo. She hopes that she will be lucky, and that when Theo falls in love with Serne, he won't hate Judith enough to want to kill her. She notices a ring under his shirt collar and tries to remember if it was in the original novel. She tries to gently unbutton his shirt to get a closer look, but he suddenly wakes up. She tries to explain that she wasn't trying to undress him, but he abruptly rolls over and ends up on top of her. He asks if she has had time to prepare herself mentally. Judith tries to stop him. She turns away and says that she doesn't like body-only relationships. Theo replies that he likes her a lot, to which Judith says that he only likes her body. He interrupts her, glancing meaningfully at her hands, which are resting on his chest. Judith makes him get up and says she'd like to get to know His Majesty better, so there's no need to hurry. Theo calmly says that she can always say no, he won't insist, and apologizes for rushing in and asking for permission to take her hand. He says he wants to ask her something, looking into her eyes. The next moment, he asks if she'll be with him at the competition. On the carriage ride home, Judith thought about the hunting competition. She used to skip them every year to avoid meeting the Emperor. But now, he had offered to join her. Her father sees her brooding and asks if the Emperor is forcing her to do something she doesn't want to do. He says she doesn't have to force herself to do something she doesn't like. Judith hastens to say that Theo doesn't allow himself too much. On the contrary, he listens to her more than she expected. In addition, because they don't know each other well yet, Judith insisted on platonic communication in their meeting. She asks her father not to worry, and promises that he will be the first to know if anything happens and scold His Majesty. He thinks he's worrying for nothing. It's Judith's decision after all. He should respect her choice, even if Theo doesn't like it. He says he knows she can do anything. He just sometimes forgets that his daughter is so grown up. Judith says she's sorry to bother them, and Lord Farger breaks into tears. He didn't know she had such respect for her father's feelings. Now he understands his father-in-law's feelings when he and Layla, Judith's mother, got married. In his mind, he tells his wife that their daughter is all grown up now. An annual hunting competition, organized by the imperial family to maintain harmony between the emperor and the nobility. The winner is the most successful hunter. Before starting, women give a kiss to the participants for good luck and safe return. And men pluck a bouquet of flowers during the hunt and give it to a lady with a declaration of love. Therefore, the event is popular with young men and girls. Judith fears that Theo has called her to escort him to the eating contest and for the purpose of stealing a kiss and then handing over the bouquet. She is still shy to publicly announce their relationship, and she will have to kiss His Majesty in front of everyone for good luck. Judith is so caught up in the plan to break up with the Emperor that she's forgotten that she never had a relationship in her previous life. In fact, Theo is her first boyfriend too. With a rush of feelings, she sinks into the pillow sitting on her bed and screams. She is now the lover of the Emperor she has read so much about. To calm down, she decides to take another walk to the candy store and get some fresh air. Sweets are the best remedy for all worries. There were still plenty of buns left. She decides to take all of them to share with her family and the subject residents, since she lost her buns to that rude stranger last time. As she approaches the carriage, she realizes that she cannot open the door, as her hands are occupied with a bag. She asks Jason, the coachman, to open the door for her, but then some unknown guy suddenly and gallantly opens the door for her. Judith confusedly thanks him and gets in. As they travel, she feels the carriage shake unaccustomedly violently, wondering if they are going the wrong way. When the carriage stops, Judith asks Jason why it is going so fast. The door opens, and the guy who opened the door for her shows up. He apologizes for not being who she expected to see. Judith decides it's a kidnapping and offers him money, but a blue light forms in the guy's hand, and he says she doesn't need to know the details of their plan. Just let her sit in silence. He points the blue beam from his palm directly at Judith, but there is no magic shield forming in front of her, which seems to absorb the blow. The guy yells in amazement why Judith is okay. He hit her with magic. She doesn't know why they decided to kidnap her, but she grabs the chance while her opponent is distracted. She tries to concentrate like she practiced with her brothers. Surely there must be magic appropriate for such an occasion. She thought back to Lucen's words about the magic with which one could win in a single blow. She asked him for something quick and easy. He said it was impossible for a mere human. Judith was already starting to get angry. Then her brother said she needed magic for self-defense instead of strong magic. Better a quick and safe way to take the enemy by surprise, something like magic lightning. And so Judith concentrated all the power in her palm, from which purple lightning bolts began to flash. This magic is so fast, it's hard to aim. The kidnapper stares at her stunned. He didn't expect Judith to be capable of such a thing. She remembers to attack when her opponent is close to her. With all her strength, she thrust her palm straight at her opponent's chest. The stricken guy falls face down, right at Judith's feet. She decides to hurry to get out of the place before he wakes up, only she doesn't know where she is. No sooner has Judith stepped away from the carriage than her captor grabs her from behind and puts his hand over her mouth. He tells her he didn't think she had magic and tells her to be quiet and not move, or he'll break her arms. Jude panics and mentally prays for salvation, as his opponent is hit with magic right in the nose so hard that he falls to the ground, letting go of Judith. She, on the other hand, falls into the caring hands of the stranger who stole the buns from her a few days ago. She exclaims in amazement at what he is doing here. He chuckles. Is that really all she can say when she meets a familiar face? She asks again what he's doing here, and turns back to the kidnapper. Iard says he's just passed out, but he'll wake up soon. He asks if Judith wanted to kill the villain, and she shakes her head and confusedly thanks him for saving her. She says, clutching her shaking hands, that she will repay the favor when she gets home. Iard asks if she can make it back on her own. Judith nods, but he says she doesn't know the way. Let her follow him. She obediently follows him and wonders why he is suddenly so kind. Judith warns him that she'll scream if he takes her to some strange place. Iard smirks again. If he wanted to do something, he would have done it by now. Judith grudgingly admits that he is right, for in fact the stranger did help her. But she's not sure she can trust him. She thanks him again, admitting that she was scared and still angry at him for the last time. She promises to reward him for saving her if he comes to the Farger residence tomorrow. He says he can do without Judith's obsessive gratitude, but she doesn't want to be indebted. He suggests that she simply stop imposing, adding that it would be more polite for her to visit him herself. Judith is annoyed by this, but he's right. She asks him to tell her his address, then she'll show up with a bag of gold. But Iard refuses to do that too. Angry, Judith says his behavior is intolerable, and he offers to bring him chocolate buns from that candy store to their next meeting. Judith decides he's obsessed with those scones. Iard stops at the square and says that Judith can probably make it to the carriage on her own. She replies defiantly that she can manage without him, and he can go wherever he wants. Judith is angry with herself for having thought him a good man for a moment. Suddenly she turned around to get his name, but the stranger was gone. She didn't even get a chance to say goodbye. Later, her father and brothers took her away, and the missing Jason was found tied up in a warehouse. Theo scoured the entire empire looking for her kidnapper, but found no one. Judith tearfully begged Jason not to be fired, and they did, but the coachman's wages were cut. She was forbidden to leave the estate alone for a while. Lying in her room, Judith thinks she feels sorry for Jason because she made him go with her, and since she's forbidden to go out, she can't go to Camilla's pastry shop. She just hopes the stranger isn't waiting for her. Iard, meanwhile, in some back alley, walks along the cages with his beasts. In one of them sits a chimera named Shran. Iard reaches out his hand, beckons the beast to him, and gently strokes his face. He is approached by an assistant named Verde, who tells him that he ordered them to deal with the kidnappers. Iard thanks him for a job well done, but he dismisses him as just following orders. Verde asks, "That woman the Lord spoke of, does she really undo magic strikes? That's impossible." Iard corrects, "It's not canceling, it's absorbing." She turns the opponent's attack into her mana, an ability of an extinct demonic race. Rumor has it that Lord Farger and his eldest son have incredible powers, passed down from demonic ancestors, and Judith has inherited the power of another demon. He tells his assistant to keep an eye on the girl and not let himself be discovered. Arcade thinks that the Emperor's beloved has unprecedented magical powers. He says angrily that his brother always manages to get the best. After a while, Judith arrives at a hunting competition. She gets out of the carriage and stretches sweetly. It's nice to be out in the fresh air. Theo calls out to her, handsome as ever. She asks why he has arrived so early, as the imperial family is usually the last to arrive. He replies that he wanted to see Judith and kisses her hand. People gawked at them, and Lord Farger and his ugly son stared at the couple unkindly. Later, as the hunters were getting ready to leave, Judith walked over to Cain and kissed him on the cheek for good luck, because the captain of the knights would be the first to depart. She asks him to be careful, and he asks the same of her, and then her father coughs. With a laugh, Judith approached him with a kiss. She searches Theo's eyes. He is standing all alone. She goes to him and takes him aside so that no one can see them. Judith tells him, very embarrassed, that she has come to wish the Emperor good luck. Theo says it's okay, she doesn't have to follow tradition. But Judith rises on her toes and kisses him timidly on the cheek. She turns away hastily, saying she is doing it of her own free will. But he takes her chin with his fingers and forces her to look at him, saying that he had never hoped to get a blessing on her lips. She turns away and asks him to understand her correctly, which is just a blessing. He doesn't react. Judith doesn't understand why he's suddenly so cold. She is about to leave, but Theo suddenly stops her, turns her around and kisses her gently on the forehead. Taking a step back, he tells her to get it right too. It's all just a blessing. He walks away triumphantly, pleased to himself that he didn't give away his emotions. The competition begins. The noble ladies sit on a blanket under a tree and discuss who will win this year. It must be the Emperor, because he's with his beloved. The other ladies look at Judith with interest as she wants to go under. One of them, Isabella Leon, approaches Judith and says hello. She panics. In the novel from the encounter did not take place under these circumstances. In the story, Isabella was the villain Judith's right-hand woman. She had feelings for the Emperor and was very jealous of Judith. Skillfully manipulating Isabella's crush, Judith used her to destroy Cernai. But the kind heroine saved Isabella's life, and she became her closest friend. Judith thinks to herself that betrayal awaits her and Isabella in the future, and decides to stay away from her, but says hello out loud. Isabella says she has long wanted to meet Judith, and asks permission to send invitations to tea. Judith prays to herself that she will not send anything, but she says with a polite smile that she will come if she has nothing else to do. Later, they do have tea together, much to Judith's displeasure. Isabella asks Judith to taste her floral tea from the jungle in the southwest of the continent. Judith agrees, but no sooner does she take the cup from Isabella's hands than it falls into her lap. Everyone stirred. The tea must have been hot. Judith suspects that Isabella dropped the cup on purpose. Isabella says it's okay, and then says that Miss Judith's hands are shaking, looking right at her. Judith is angry, but decides not to show it, but to act like a real lady. She smiles sweetly and tells Isabella that she is being childish. A stunned Isabella asks what the Jedi means, but suddenly the Emperor grows in front of them. He sells Judith's hand and reminds her that they were going on a picnic together. Judith asks why he is not at the competition. Theo replies that with them, he won't have time for a picnic with Judith. He rushes her because he wants to show her something. She stops him. Now it would be rude to just leave. She turns to the girls and apologizes for leaving suddenly. Those say it's okay, they'll continue chatting another time. Behind Judith's back stands an angry and impatient Emperor. They leave, holding hands, and the ladies begin to whisper that they've never seen the Emperor as amiable with anyone as he is with Lady Farger. Perhaps soon they will hear news of the wedding. Isabella listens silently, her hands clasped in her lap. Walking beside the Emperor, Judith thinks what a strong impression he makes on everyone. He is feared. Isabella looked upset, but she was the first to start a fight with Judith. Theo doesn't look like a tyrant in Judith's eyes. She's glad he's on her side. She asks Theo if it's okay for him not to participate in the competition, since it's designed to strengthen the relationship between the imperial family and the nobility. He just raises his clasped hands and says that he is already working hard to strengthen their relationship. Jude T tries to hide her delight at his gesture and asks what he wanted to show her. He says they are almost there and asks her to take a look. He looks in the indicated direction and sees a lovely field dotted with pink and purple flowers. Theo says he originally wanted to pick her a bouquet here, but then decided that a few flowers wouldn't be enough. Judith spins around delightedly and asks if he's giving her the whole field. Theo thought for a few moments, looking at her. Then he said firmly that if she wanted, he would give Judith the whole empire instead of the usual flower field. Judith is amazed at how courtship standards change when you meet the emperor. She thinks the empire will be too much for her and says she's had enough of flowers. The emperor playfully says that his beloved is modest. Judith thinks it is only because she should not get attached to his majesty. She wonders how to change the subject before he starts talking about marriage again, and then she notices a piece of jewelry around his neck. She asks Theo to let her see what is hanging on his chain. He obediently removes the chain and ring from himself and puts it in Judith's hands. She looks at the ring and remembers that it was the one she lost as a child. Judith asks where Theo got it, starting to suspect something. He tells her that she gave it to him about 14 years ago. Judith realizes that this doesn't fit the plot of the novel at all, and she doesn't remember having met the emperor before. She asks if Theo is sure he didn't just find it somewhere. He replies, chagrined, that she gave him a ring and asked him to marry her. Judith tries to understand how this could have happened, and Theo says that he has been waiting for her all this time. He sees that she has forgotten what he has cherished in his memories. He confesses that he always thinks of Judith before he goes to bed, worried about her and longed to meet her again, which is why he went to boring balls. He's been looking for her all these years. Theo asks Judith not to deny his offer, even if she doesn't remember it. He takes her hands in his and repeats again that he is not going to let her go. Judith is heartbroken. The fact that Theo has kept the ring all these years means that there will be no more Surnai. Just Judith, who had no name or identity, who was just a little girl. Judith feels happy, and she tells Theo to keep this ring as proof of her proposal. She thinks his love might change, but now she wants to trust Theo. As they walk back up to the tents, they see an angry Cain, and Theo realizes something is wrong. He apologizes, but says he's so lucky to have an understanding woman. He kisses her forehead and asks her to be careful and think of him. Judith reflects that at first this relationship was a strain on her, but she is beginning to like it more and more. She sees Isabella hiding in the bushes. Isabella doesn't see Judith. She's looking somewhere and thinking angrily about what hole this upstart came out of, and how dare she behave like that in front of His Majesty. Furious, she kicks a small pebble on the path, and it hits the paw of some animal, which growls in response to the blow. Isabella hears a sound, turns around, and sees a huge three-headed dog. The dog growls menacingly at Isabella, and she covers her head with her hands in terror. Judith yells for her to step aside and blasts magic directly at the dog. It bursts into flames and starts howling and whimpering. Eventually, the Cerberus falls silently, unconscious, and a stunned Isabella slumps to the ground next to the smoking dog, unable to recover. Judith comes up to her and asks if everything is all right. She used magic because Isabella was in danger, though she doubted she would succeed. Apparently, the special lessons with Lucin hadn't gone to waste. She tells Isabella that they must hurry before the Cerberus regains consciousness. But a pack of wolves comes out of the forest. Judith doesn't understand why there are so many of them, and realizes that the two of them can't get out. Judith asks Isabella if she can run like that. She will use magic to distract the monsters, and as soon as she gives the signal, Isabella must run away immediately. She is shaking and says she can't run away because the wolves will chase her. Judith realizes that she is scared, but now is not the time to be sad. She asks if Isabella is hiding something from Judith. She answers reluctantly that she was just wondering if the Emperor would come to her rescue if she was in danger. So she made a special tea to lure the animals and smashed it on herself. She swears to Judith that she knows nothing about these animals. Judith yells at her, saying what was she thinking, putting herself in such danger. The wolves are closing in on them with a wrenching growl. Judith realizes that now is not the time to argue. She opens the hem of Isabella's dress. Without it, the monsters will not pay attention to her. She tells Isabella to run as soon as she signals and to call the knights when she is safe. Isabella asks what will happen to Judith if she keeps the cloth. Judith smiles and tells her not to worry, but she is Lord Lucin's apprentice to the Tower Master, noting that his talent has bypassed her sister. Meanwhile, the wolves are coming closer and closer. Judith shouts to Isabella to run, and she obeys. A flash of violet light illuminates the forest. It's Judith, lowered and with her hands on the ground, summoning barrier magic. She wonders how long it's been, because she can't hold such a defense for long. She fears that Isabella has decided not to call the knights and has left Judith to her fate. If her magical energy runs out, Judith will be finished too. She realizes with horror that she could die like this. All this time she has only worried about dying at the hands of a tyrant, never even thinking that she could die any other way. She ponders whether Theo will live a happy life with Cernai, and whether she will remember Judith. Judith's strength is running out. She thinks about how she doesn't want to die, and then she hears Theo's voice. He rides to her aid on horseback, bow in hand. Throwing back his bow, after one arrow is fired, he summons the sword Rakion. It materializes in his hand, emitting a bright golden glow. Theo swung it, and the power of the sword reached the wolves in the distance. A moment later, the clearing was cleared, and Theo rushed toward Judith. He wraps her in a tight embrace and asks her to never again throw herself into helping others without sparing herself. He says he doesn't want to lose Judith. She feels his trembling hands, hears the cracked voice, feels how tightly he doesn't hug her, and realizes that Theo is just as scared as she is. Judith apologizes for making him worry. He's here for her, not to kill her, but to save her. They return to the tent city, escorted by knights. Her father and Cain rush over to Judith. Lord Farger bows to Theo and thanks him fervently for the Emperor's rescue of his daughter. Theo replies that Judith is not hurt, but is very frightened. We must ask the imperial physician to examine her. Father says they are very grateful to His Majesty. Theo orders Cain to gather the knights and find out how the chimera could have gotten into the forest. Judith looks worriedly at Theo. After some time, Cain returns with a report. They believe that the chimera came here from the outskirts of the hunting grounds, attracted by the smell of laxus flowers. During their investigation, they found these flowers in Miss Leon's tea. The Emperor says thoughtfully that these flowers cause hallucinations and aggression in animals and monsters. He looks at Isabella and asks how she could add such a dangerous plant to her tea. He asks Isabella's father, Marquis Leon, if he knows anything. He replies that someone is trying to frame his daughter, and what's more, she herself has been attacked by monsters. He asks His Majesty for permission to investigate Isabella himself. He stares intently at the Marquis, pondering. When Judith gently takes his hand and looks into his eyes, Theo realizes what she wants to say and gives her permission. Later, in his tent, Marquis Leon sternly asks his daughter, without looking at her, if she did it. She starts to answer, but he shouts that she has already made a mess of things, and it is time for her to grow up. He shouted, waving his arms, that her carelessness had already nearly destroyed her younger brother. What would their father be like if His Majesty found out about everything? A little calmer, the Marquis tells his daughter to sit quietly. He will take care of everything himself. Isabella obediently agrees. He turns his back on her and leaves, saying that she is a fool. Judith comes quietly into the room and asks Isabella to speak to her. She was frightened that Miss Farger might want to interrogate her, but she let her in. Judith asks with genuine concern how Isabella is feeling and if she is hurt. Judith says Cain told her how Miss Leon came rushing in for help. Her dress and shoes were a mess. Judith thanks her for calling the knights, thus saving her life. Isabella starts to reply that she should thank her, but Judith calls out. As she leaves, she says it's been a hard day. Let Isabella get some proper rest. Laughing, she adds that she should never do anything dangerous again. As it begins to get dark, her father takes Judith to the carriage, saying it is time for them to leave. But they are stopped by Theo, who wants to walk Judith to the carriage himself. She sits down, and they say goodnight to each other. Theo returns to the knights and asks if they have been able to find out where the chimeras came from. He is told that they have found traces of black magic in the west, so the monsters must have come from there. Theo asks what was done with the magician who was doing the experiments. He is told that he was no longer there. Apparently, after he left, the hungry monsters went in search of food. All the remaining monsters are killed, and their bodies are ordered to be burned. Theo thinks about experimenting with black magic and calls Cain. He orders him to find Iard. The latter asks in surprise if the second prince is still alive. The Emperor replies that according to confirmed information, 5 years ago his brother was on his way to Arcel, west of Lihist. Many reports of black magic have come from there recently. Without a leader, such a scale is not possible. If the second prince is trying to regain his power, Theo can't turn a blind eye. He thinks to himself that he wished Iard a better life, away from the palace. Cain asks what the emperor is going to do if his brother is really behind all this. Theo remembers his younger brother as a child, covered in blood, begging to kill him. He clenches his fists and tells Cain that this time he will have to kill Iard. Later that night, Father sits by the bedside of a sleeping Judith. Lucin comes into the room and worries loudly about the fair one, because monsters have been seen in the woods. The father tells him to keep his voice down and suggests that he leave the room and talk in private. Sitting down to tea, he tells his son that it is time for them to unseal Judith. He's been thinking about it since the day of the kidnapping, before he could find an escort for her. But something could always go wrong, no matter how careful they were. She needs protection and strength. He doesn't want to go through the events of 14 years ago again. Judith had disappeared for half a day and was found unconscious on a bench. The healer said that Judith had inherited a great power. She can absorb magic and turn it into her own mana. She suffers greatly. Having absorbed too much magic, there was a leak. She attacked Lucin because of the fact that she perceives everything but her own mana as enemies. Lucin asks if all this means is that someone attacked Judith. The doctor replies that it is possible. Her magic is so powerful that it can kill a man. He recommends that they seal her power until the girl can control it. Her father fears the consequences, but the healer replies that she will have magic, albeit weak. It will also seal all memories of who attacked her and why. In the morning, Judith remembered nothing and ran to Lucin in the garden to ask who had attacked her. He replied that it was the teacher who had hit her for being childish, which was nothing. Judith fervently said that she would then defend her brother. The family decided to keep the event secret for the time being, for her protection. Now Lucin says that if the seal is broken, Judith will be able to use powerful magic, but he doubts she'll be able to control mana. Cain enters the room and says he agrees with his father. She would have died today if His Majesty hadn't rushed to her aid. It is said that she is Judith who tried to save the daughter of the Marquis of Leon. She always comes to the aid of others, and you can't vouch that this nightmare won't happen again. Lucin sighs and agrees to unseal his sister. They go to her room, he sits on the edge of the bed, and with his hand on her forehead, he casts a spell. Judith lights up with a pink glow. The next morning, Judith wakes up with a strange heaviness in her body, thinking that she overexerted herself yesterday. She hears a noise and looks out of the room. Theo is standing in front of the door, looking into her eyes and asking her anxiously if she has any pain. Judith doesn't understand why he's already here. Lucin and Cain come up and tell the emperor that turmoil and noise are not the best conditions for sleeping. He replies that if the brothers hadn't tried to stop him, everything would have been quiet. Lucin replies that all the brothers always stop strangers on their way to their sister's bedroom. Theo says it's rude of them to call him a stranger, since they may soon be twinned. Judith tries to stop their quarrel and leads the emperor away, telling the brothers to go to the dining room first. They leave, urging them to hurry, Lucin quietly reminding them where to strike in case of trouble. Judith is angry that there is a fight every time the three of them meet, and asks Theo not to come by to pick her up anymore. He replies that he was just worried. Judith says she can get more knights to guard him so he won't worry. The emperor's time is wasted by coming here. He's busy with the business of the empire. She notices a languid smile on Theo's lips. He says she's beautiful, even when she's just woken up. Judith realizes that she hasn't even washed her face and tries to close up. Theo pulls her hands away. He says she's beautiful. No need to hide. She honestly says she's ashamed to show her unwashed face. She pulls away from him and says she'll go get dressed and he can join her for breakfast. Judith's eyes go dark. Theo jumps up and she calms him down, telling him he's just dizzy. Apparently, after using magic last night. Theo picks her up in his arms without further ado. He leaves the room and shouts for a carriage to be prepared immediately, because Judith must be examined by the imperial physician. All the servants look at them with their mouths hanging open. Judith is very uncomfortable. Theo puts her in a carriage and tells her brothers and father that the girl is very dizzy. He will get her into the palace to see a doctor, and then she will rest. Cain yells that she needs to be home to rest. Theo abruptly tells Kane to get back to work and reminds him who the Emperor is. The family stares helplessly at the carriage, and then Lucen sighs, and everyone turns to him. He had forgotten to tell Judith that he had unsealed it. A few hours later at the palace, the Emperor is sitting in a cubicle working with papers, constantly glancing at Judith, who is reading nearby. She notices his gaze and sternly tells him to work instead of staring at her. Theo is worried, but she tells him that the doctor checked her out and everything is fine. Reluctantly, he looks away. Judith thinks she still has a strange heaviness in her body and doesn't understand why. Theo places the last seal and says he is finally finished. He calls out to her, but sees that Judith has fallen asleep while waiting for him. He is nervous and realizes that her condition is clearly not okay. At first, she refused lunch, citing lack of appetite. She has weakness, indigestion, and heaviness in her body. Theo puts the symptoms together in his mind. He remembers Judith saying she was on birth control, but concludes that they are having a baby. Judith wakes up on her bed, next to her at Theo's desk, writing something. She realizes that he moved her here while she was asleep and asks why she is here. He should have woken her up right away. Theo tells her to lie down again. A sudden rise can be harmful, and at a time like this, you have to be very careful about everything. He apologizes for not being careful, because this is a serious strain on the body. Judith doesn't understand what he's up to, and Theo says that although he's confused, he'll do his best to make sure she's not worried. She asks him what he's talking about. Theo starts to talk about his baby in her womb, but then they get a shout that Judith's brother is here. He goes back to get his sister because it's 5 o'clock in the evening. Theo grudgingly says to let the noisy Lucene come in. He comes in, runs up to his sister, and bombards her with questions about her health. Theo listens to his chatter and realizes that Judith is definitely carrying his baby. Lucen says he's taking Judith home. She thinks the fight is about to start again. But Theo suddenly says that he was picking her up and taking her away as soon as possible. He walks over to her, looks closely into her eyes, and asks her to be very careful and get a good night's rest. He will take care of everything himself. Judith and her brother leave, and Theo sits down at the table, looks thoughtfully at the letter he wrote while Judith was asleep, and realizes that they need to get married right away. As they walk down the stairs to the carriage, Lucene asks if she felt faint. She replies that she was a little drowsy. He says he wanted to tell her something this morning, but because of Theo, he forgot. He offers to sit down because the news is not easy. They sit down in the garden, and Lucene asks her to put out her hand. Judith obediently holds out her hand, and Lucene covers it with his and says she might get dizzy now. A blue light spreads between their hands. Judith feels like she's going to throw up, but it ends. Lucen says he's used a healing spell, so she should feel better. She does feel like a feather, but why would she need a healing spell? She's healthy. He says that she is known, that her ability is to destroy magic with her shield, but in reality, she absorbs magic and converts it into her mana. The more she is attacked, the stronger her mana is. But this is very dangerous, as it can lead to a surge of magical energy. They've kept Judith's real powers a secret, but now she's an adult and can take responsibility for her powers. So last night they broke the seal. That was why she felt so bad today. The unstable mana flow affected her condition. Judith doesn't understand what it means, or why there are so many discrepancies with the original novel. She asks her brother why she didn't know such important information about herself. He says that her memories of the day when she was 6 years old were sealed along with her mother's. That's why she doesn't remember what happened the day she disappeared back then. Judith realizes that Theo was about the same age when they met as children. Something happened that influenced the foundation of the novel's plot. Lucen gets up and says that it is time for them to go home. It is getting late. But then one of the mages comes running to them with an urgent message from the magic tower, and Lucen has to go with him immediately. But he interrupts him, saying that he is with his sister now, so he is not going anywhere. Judith says she's fine and has more chaperones. Let her look for service. Lucen runs off, yelling for them not to stop anywhere else. As Judith drives past the square, she notices a crowd of cheerful people in the square. It's the fair. She would like to go there, but she promised her brother she would go straight home. She wants to go to Camilla's pastry shop for food too. She is afraid that the stranger who saved her from the kidnapper will think that she has cheated him out of his reward. And then she sees the same man in the square among the other townspeople. She yells for the carriage to stop and runs out screaming that she will be back soon. The attendant shouts that it is dangerous to go alone, but Judith has already fled. Judith runs after the man, unable even to call his name, for she does not know him. She struggles to catch up with him and clutches the man's cloak from behind. She's glad she finally caught him, but then the man turns around, but it's not Iard. Judith is very embarrassed and apologizes. She's just mistaken. The empire is huge. The chances of meeting her savior again are slim. She decides to go back to the carriage before the escorts get excited. The family will be angry if they find out she's snuck out again. Judith stands in the middle of the road. Some boy has hurt her badly and tells her not to stand like that. It disturbs people. Just then, the boy is grabbed by Iard's arm. He says he has to give something back to the girl, while the boy lashes out and swears. Iard tells Judith that she is standing on a crowded street, rich and alone, the perfect target for a thief. As he says this, he twists the boy and shakes him, Judith's bracelet falling out of his pockets. Iard looks at the thief and says that he has fearlessly robbed a noble lady, and asks if he knows that his now rise under the laws of the empire. Judith stops him. She is the victim. She will decide what the thief will be called. She tells the boy that stealing is a serious crime, and even children are punished for it. Toth says he needs money. Judith asks why, and Toth replies that his brother is sick, but they can't afford the medicine. Then Judith says she will cover all the costs of his brother's treatment. The boy is delighted, but Judith asks him to have lunch in return, that he will never steal again, and he agrees. Iard looks at them doubtfully. The boy leaves, thanking Judith and promising not to forget what she has done for him. She waves after him and shouts for him to remember their agreement. Iard approaches her and says he wondered what she was up to, saying she would punish the thief herself. He thinks the boy lied to get away, and Judith believed his sob story. She says it's nice of him to worry about being tricked. She really isn't sure if the thief was telling the truth, but she doesn't care. If there's no sick brother, that's a good thing. And thanks to her money, at least he won't rob anyone today. She says that the boy was very poorly dressed. He must have a hard life. Stealing, of course, is not the solution, but the responsibility for the difficult world that adults have created should not fall on children. She says her actions may seem hypocritical, but that's all she can do for now. She also really wants to believe what the boy says. That's when they are called out by one of her escorts, who runs towards them. She had completely forgotten about him. She's going to be in trouble now. He comes up and asks why she ran away. Judith says she saw someone she knew and wanted to say hello. The one asks who she was here with. She says the man who helped her once. She looks back, but Iard has already disappeared. She again didn't have time to thank him, and it's unknown if they will meet again. And Iard walks leisurely down the alley, thinking that the increase in her escort is making things much more difficult. He is met at the gate by Virde, who tells him that they have completed the preparations for copying those individuals on his orders. All that remains is for them to obtain the blood of the princess. Iard says his presence will let her guard down, since he's the only one of them she knows personally. He thinks the dragon's abilities can be copied, albeit with a side effect. But he doesn't understand why he helped Judith. Suddenly, his heart pinches. Another attack. A woman's arms gently wrap around him, voice saying that no one else will love his imperfect body like she does. A voice whispers in his ear that he thinks this girl is cute now, but there's no telling how she'll react when she finds out who Iard really is. He must obey his mother. She is the only one who will take care of him. Just then, the vision melts away. Iard sits alone on the ground. With annoyance, he says she talks a lot. The time between his attacks is getting shorter. He needs to get those abilities now. For that, he needs the princess. And in the north of the empire, in the lands of the Marquis Spencer, the maid tells the lady that Lord Lloyd asks for an audience. He brought an urgent letter from the palace. The woman, lying in the bath, tells him to come in. The lord enters and asks if everything went well last night, but the Marquis tells him to get straight to the point. A letter from the emperor has arrived, and Lloyd is determined to tell his mistress as soon as possible. She tells him to read the letter aloud. The emperor, in a letter, asks to bring some cherry trees that have not yet blossomed. He needs them for the wedding. The marquise is surprised at the news of the wedding. She asks the Lord if the Emperor was planning a wedding. He replies that His Majesty was not interested in women. It was dangerous to even mention marriage in his presence. The Marquise comes out of the bathroom amazed at the hasty wedding and the absurd demands associated with it. She gives Lloyd an hour to find 10 trees. She wants to see for herself the woman who has managed to charm the Emperor. And so, news reaches the palace that the Marquis Spencer is giving a reception in the capital, to which only women are invited. Theo tells Judith that she will receive an invitation, but she can decline. Marquise Elsith Spencer is the current ruler of the Spencer lands and the Emperor's only maternal cousin. She was once accused of complicity for helping Theo's mother poison Iard. Their entire family was executed, except for 10-year-old Elsith and her newborn nephew. Everyone thought that the Spencer family's days were numbered, but Elsith thought otherwise. She became a knight, and together with Theo, she fought many battles and earned unprecedented fame. Later, she became a close associate of the Emperor, and no one could doubt her position. Judith recalls that in the novel, Cerne had a great deal of respect for Elsith, and Elsith considered Judith a pain in the ass. Judith now believes that Elsith has invited her to meet her cousin's girlfriend in person. Theo says Judith can say no. He'll take care of everything. Her health is more important than anything else right now, but Judith replies that she hasn't received any invitations in a long time. She realizes that she will have to meet Elsith sooner or later, since she is planning a wedding with Theo. She asks Theo why he's so focused on her health. Maybe Lucine told her something, but she's really well. Theo replies that it will be hard for her to eat for 9 months and asks her not to work so hard. Judith still doesn't know what Theo is talking about and asks if he means the sealed manna, but Theo says he means the baby Judith is carrying. She is shocked. She never would have thought Theo was capable of being so deluded. Now she understands why he's been acting so strangely. Bringing books about parenthood, playing classical music. Judith thinks sadly of how Theo will behave when Cerne appears. She does not fully believe that what is happening is real. At home, the butler brings her a letter. The same invitation to the Marquis of Spencer's reception. Lucine wonders if she should decline because the Marquis doesn't get along with Cain. Judith is surprised that they know each other, but Lucine says they dated 10 years ago. Judith is angry that she didn't know anything about it. Lucine says they broke up a week later. He teased Cain that since he was now busy, Judith would only play with Lucine. So Cain breaks up with the Marquise. Judith looks at her brother disapprovingly, but he excuses himself by saying that he did not know Cain would do such a thing. He asks Judith to be careful. He has a bad feeling. In any case, the atmosphere whenever the two meet is not the most favorable. Judith only began to worry more. Her brother had broken up with Elsith because of her. She had almost lost her life when she met Isabella, and something terrible might happen this time too. Here she stops the flow of sad thoughts. It's not like it's her fault she got into Judith's body or Cain and Theo's behavior. It's not fair that she's hated just because her character is a villain. Later, Judith arrives at Spencer Manor. She is very nervous without her brothers. Her every move today will affect the family's reputation. She could put on a mask, but she orders herself not to be afraid and spreads her shoulders. The butler announces her arrival. Judith thinks she has already spent 20 years in this world as a princess, and enters the hall, greeting the Marquise respectfully. Elsith smiles wryly. No chaperones are allowed for this evening, so she hadn't expected to see Judith. But then she thanked Lady Farger graciously for accepting her invitation. Judith doesn't know much about Elsith, and the novel had little to say about the Marquise. But the Marquise looks stunning in person, even though she didn't even wear a dress to the soiree. Judith really doesn't want Elsith to hate her. Elsith notices her stare and asks what the reason is. Maybe because she's not wearing a dress. Judith rushes to say that her outfit fits her perfectly and that she looks cool, but is immediately embarrassed when she realizes that she has said some incomprehensible nonsense. Elsith asks what the box Judith's maid is holding. Judith replies that it is a small gift for the Marquise. She has heard that Elsith likes sweets, so she baked her some cookies. She adds that she is not sure if Elsith will like them. The Marquise pretends to be touched, cute cookies baked by a sincere princess. She tilts her head and asks Judith why she is giving them to her. She was frightened that she had misjudged the gift and was shaking under the Marquise's stern gaze. She had hoped to make a good impression on their first meeting, to change her attitude. She starts to babble that she would like Elsith to like her, but then she laughs and tells her not to be scared, holding her chin gently. Theo had just fallen in love, and she wondered what kind of vixen had won him over, and it turned out to be a cute rabbit. The Marquise apologizes for her rudeness. She didn't invite Judith to mock her, but to see what kind of person she is. She says that Judith was so nervous that Elsith wanted to tease her. She asks why Judith is so nervous, maybe afraid of Elsith. Judith replies that she was embarrassed to come because of Cain and the Marquise's relationship. Elsith dryly replies that she can't stand the jerk. She reassures Judith by saying that her relationship with Cain has nothing to do with Judith. The Marquise is not in the habit of knowingly misjudging people because of their relatives. Kissing Judith's hand gallantly, Elsith asks to have fun tonight, since the obnoxious brothers aren't here, and leaves. Judith thinks Cain must be crazy to leave a woman like the Marquise. Judith is approached by Miss Renee, who saw her at the competition. She asks if Judith has seen Isabella, as she seems to be looking for her. Judith replies that they haven't said hello yet, and wonders why Isabella is looking for her. Judith is asked for a moment by a girl who introduces herself as Sienna, the Earl of Glorton's eldest daughter, and her mother. The woman begins to say that she was eager to meet Judith when she heard she would be at the reception, but Judith hardly listens to her. She notices a girl behind their backs that Sienna hasn't introduced. The girl looks sad, but still smiles and nods to Judith when she notices the look on her face. Judith thinks that the girl might just not like this kind of interaction, but still she becomes uneasy. Later, the girls sat around discussing recent rumors. They say that this reception was arranged to find the Marquise's nephew a bride, and that Elsith wants to bequeath her title to him. Judith thinks only of how tired she is. She used to be curious to know what goes on at the women's banquets, but it turns out that all they discuss is marriages. She doesn't understand why a fantasy novel is based on a real era. The girls see her thoughtfulness and call out to her. She replies that she has not been to a reception for a long time and is tired, and asks permission to leave first. She is relieved to go outside and see on a bench the very girl, the Countess of Glorton's second daughter, who had been left behind. She looks around for the Countess and Sienna and sees them chatting with someone eating. She realizes it all. In her past life, she too was alone with her family. Judith to a bench and asks if she can sit next to her. The girl says yes. Judith asks her name. She introduces herself as Leona. Judith tells her that she wanted to talk to her back in the hall, and Leona immediately moves closer and says she wanted to talk to her too. But Isabella appears with a basket in her hands. She asks in surprise who it is with Judith. The latter introduces Leona, who says that they have already met Isabella at another reception. But Isabella arrogantly replies that she doesn't remember Leona. Judith thinks she knows about Isabella's attitude toward her, but she doesn't understand why she's acting this way with Leona. Isabella holds out a basket, and inside are chocolates. Isabella says it's not just any candy, it's got whiskey in it. She didn't bring them for Judith, but she can try them too, because Isabella owes her a favor. Judith thanks and asks if Leona can try the sweets too. Isabella tenses up strangely when she hears this. Meanwhile, Marquise Elsith is sitting in her study, tasting the cookies that Judith has baked. A maid approaches her and informs her that the Emperor has arrived, so Elsith decides to go out to see him. She walks out to Theo, waiting moodily on the couch, munching on a cookie. He asks what she is eating. The Marquise says snidely that his lover baked the cookies. Theo immediately takes the rest of the cookies out of Elsith's hands and says that they shouldn't have been in her hands, and asks why Judith gave them to her. Elsith replies that it was so she could get along with the Marquise. Theo wonders why he didn't get the treat and asks where Judith is now. Judith is in the gazebo with Isabella and Leon, drinking wine. Isabella complains that, although she is also the only daughter of the Marquis Leon, her father always treats her younger brother as if he were an only child. He doesn't care what his daughter thinks and wants to marry her off favorably, as if that's her only purpose. Isabella has no interest in marriage at all. Leona, on the other hand, doesn't care about such things. She believes that everything is in your hands. She is not interested in marriage either. But Leona is much more hurt that her mother only cares about Sienna, as if she thinks Leona is useless. Judith starts yelling that it's all nonsense. Have Leona bring those who say such things about her to Judith. She'll scold them. The girls laugh and say that Miss Farger has had too much candy. She replies in a slurred voice that she is fine and will punish everyone right away. Theo appears and asks where she is going. Judith's eyes light up and she rushes into his arms and asks if he's come for her because he missed her so much. He recalls that she didn't come to the palace today and thinks, looking at the girls with suspicion, why Judith is so drunk. It's hardly wine. But then he notices the nearly empty candy basket. Judith says she will explain later, but now he needs to go with her to punish bad people. Theo tells Elseth, standing nearby, that Judith needs to rest. He will take her to the guest room. She replies that he can choose anyone he wants, so he can take care of his girlfriend. Theo takes the dozing Judith in his arms and is glad that tonight was for women only. If a man saw her like this, he would lose his eyes. After taking Judith to her room, he asks how she is feeling. She replies that she is thirsty, and Theo gets up to get her some water, but she holds his sleeve and asks him not to leave. He asks what she wants, if not to drink. Judith then sits on top of him and says that's what she wants. He tries to stop her, saying that it's not a good time for something like that. But she looks into Theo's face and asks, how can he be so handsome? It's so easy for him to seduce someone. She says she will scold him for being so deviously handsome and kisses him. Theo breaks the kiss, trying to quiet her down, but he sees that the girl has already fallen asleep. Theo holds her in his arms and feels like he's going to go crazy so soon. The next day, Judith wakes up at home with a terrible headache. She asks the maid how she got home, remembering only eating candy with Leona and Isabella. The maid replies that the emperor brought it personally. So Mr. Farger and the younger gentleman were very concerned, and there was such a commotion. Judith, hearing this, recalls their drunken kiss. She is ashamed. She told Theo she wanted to prepare herself, but she went to him. She shouts to the maid that she won't go to the palace today. She can't. Later, she is still lying on her bed, wondering what to do since there will be no trip. But then, a maid bursts into the room and shouts that there is great trouble. His Majesty has come to see Judith himself. He is already approaching the room. Judith decides to pretend to be asleep. When Theo enters, the maid greets him, mumbling something about Judith not feeling well. Theo sees the pile of blankets on the bed and realizes that Judith has wrapped herself in them out of shame. Judith lies barely breathing and hears the door slam. She thinks Theo has left, but he sits down on the edge of the bed and asks how Judith is feeling. She mumbles that she feels better. Theo says he's glad, and then takes her right into his lap in the blanket. He says that Judith was so determined yesterday, and now she won't even show her face. Judith timidly apologizes. Theo reminds her that she sat on his lap yesterday. She says she committed a sin against His Majesty. He asks what Nut and Judith lists: drinking alcohol and indecent behavior, calling the emperor by name in front of strangers, using obscene words, and groping and kissing the emperor on the lips. She says she won't drink like that again. Theo seems like a good idea. With a creepy smile, he says they'll be in big trouble if anyone sees Judith in that state. He strokes her cheek gently and tells her that she still hasn't scolded him. He strokes her cheek tenderly and tells her that she still hasn't scolded him. Later, in the palace, Theo sits in his study and thinks that he will not see Judith again today. Suddenly, the Marquise enters and asks why Theo is so sad, if it is because of Judith. She says that because of His Majesty's disappearance, she had to walk around the palace waiting for him. Elseth asks why Theo has called her, a question that must be very important since she has waited so long for him. The Emperor says he's looking for someone. Have Elseth along with Cain make inquiries about the Storm Guild. Elseth slaps her hands on the table and menacingly asks why she would work with this man. Could the person Theo is looking for be so dangerous? He replies that Iard has shown up. According to Cain's reply, he came to Valdemar via Ilkist 2 months ago. There were traces of chimeras, so it is possible that his brother is experimenting with black magic again. Elseth says that Iard is aiming for the Emperor's seat. She warned Theo not to let that child live to avoid trouble. Theo gets up from the table and replies that if Iard decides to turn himself in, his status will become public knowledge. That's why he's putting Elseth and Cain on the case. They'll be able to keep it a secret. Elseth asks if Theo is concerned that the rebels would support Iard, but the Emperor would be able to handle them. Theo replies that he really isn't afraid of the rebels, and knowing that, Iard will try to pressure him in other ways. Elsa thinks for a second, then realizes that Theo is afraid that Iard will threaten him, using Judith as leverage. The Marquise says that when she read in his letter about the wedding, she could not believe that Theo had really decided to do it, whether his intentions for Judith were so serious. Theo replies that, as Cain said, Iard's goal is to take away the throne. Squid is an empire created by conquering neighboring countries. The discontents of these remain to this day. All possible pockets of rebellion must be nipped in the bud. Elsith agrees, saying that she is against cooperating with Cain, but they will track down the Tempest Guild. But even if they manage to find the Emperor's brother and kill him, as long as Judith is Theo's lover, her life will be in danger, and Theo will not be able to stay by her side forever. Elsith leaves, slamming the door. Theo is hurt. Judith is in danger because of a childhood promise she doesn't even remember, and Theo has foolishly tied her to him for one night. And Judith has a dream in which she gives Theo a ring and promises to become his family so he won't be so lonely. She says that the ring will be proof that she asked Theo to marry her. Judith remembers something else, but is abruptly awakened by the maid. She tells Judith that she has overslept and that she must go to the palace to see the Emperor. Her father stops her in front of the carriage. He says that he had an ominous dream last night, so he does not want Judith to go to the palace. Judith asks what's dangerous about the palace. The Emperor is there. Her father shouts that Theo is the danger. Judith thinks she's already decided that her father has calmed down, but he's back to his old self. As best she can, she reassures him, telling him that she is accompanied by several people. Heartbroken, he lets his daughter go, asking her to be careful. Later, Judith and Theo are having tea, and he suggests she eat a cookie. Judith objects that he doesn't have to eat the same thing she wants, but Theo replies that he wants cookies today. He asks why Judith took the treats she baked herself to the Marquise's reception. She replies that she wanted to be friends with Elsith, as she is a close friend of Theo's. Theo jealously says he wants cookies too, but Judith hears that he hates sweets. She decides she's imagining things, and says she'll be sure to bake cookies for Theo tomorrow, but in the meantime, let him enjoy these. In her mind is a strange picture of her as a little girl feeding cookies to little Theo. Judith doesn't realize what it is. Maybe a memory. The butler comes up to them and tells Theo that what he asked for is ready. Theo then tells Judith that he has something to show her and invites her for a walk. Soon they are walking through the garden, talking about the wonderful weather. Judith glances at Theo, trying to figure out what he wants to show her. She was also a little frightened by her father's words this morning. Suddenly there was a strong wind, and she was a little frightened. As they approach the gazebo, Judith is thrilled to see a small cherry orchard in bloom. She watches mesmerized as the petals fly through the air like snowflakes. Theo asks if she likes it. Judith replies that she does, but it's strange that the cherry trees are blooming at a time like this. Theo says that the trees came from the northern part, when they weren't introduced yet, and the mages of the Empire conjured them to bloom. Judith says that the Emperor shouldn't have made such an effort for her. Theo gently touches her face and reminds Judith of her own words that the wedding will take place at cherry blossom time. Judith can't believe what is happening. The Emperor looks her tenderly in the eyes and asks if she will marry him now. Judith is confused. She knew he wanted a quick wedding, but dragging trees here from another part of the Empire is too much. She wonders what she should do now. She can't just marry him like that. After a moment of silence, Theo says that he knows Judith doesn't like his title of Emperor. Taking on the role of Empress is difficult, and he has plenty of enemies to target Judith. But he will not let anything bad happen. No threatening person will be allowed to set foot in their lands. He promises to make Judith the most luxurious empress in the history of their state. He asks only to stay with him in return. Judith wants so badly to believe him, for this perfect man is so anxious, waiting for her answer. Her heart yearns to agree, but Judith tells His Majesty that she cannot marry him. A devastated Theo asks if he was just a one-night stand for her. Judith, on the other hand, thinks she likes Theo and wants to be with him, but if he chooses Cernay, Judith is finished. She tells him that it's not that she doesn't like Theo, it's just that things are happening too fast in E. He's already agreed to let the relationship move at her pace. Judith asks for a chance to get to know Theo better. He asks how long it will take. She replies that until the cherry tree blossoms on its own. Theo asks what if she decides to leave him after waiting so long. After all, the first time they met, she left a note and ran away, and pretended to be a maid. Judith giggles. He asks why. She replies that she's just remembering how much business she's turned around, and wonders if Theo is thinking about that day in his food. She thinks how sweet Theo is, and says there's another way to keep His Majesty from worrying, to formally announce the engagement. Later she tells the news to her family. They are not happy. Cain asks why she didn't ask their advice. Maybe the emperor threatened her. Lucen suggests they attack the palace now. Judith knew this would happen. She calmly explains that the engagement was her idea. Since nobles often insist on rulers marrying, if they are educated, he will be left alone. She is sure that the emperor himself does not want to rush the wedding. They will wait until Judith's interest in him has waned and break off the engagement. But the family don't like it. They scream that no man in his right mind would break off his engagement to Judith, that Theo's boundaries would be completely erased by the engagement. Judith wistfully thinks it's impossible to doubt herself in her loving family. But in the plot of the novel, Theo's heart is swept over to another. On the one hand, she is looking forward to the appearance of Cerny, and on the other hand, does not want it at all. Later, at a meeting of the nobles, Theo announces his engagement, which will take place in 2 weeks, and asks for objections. The nobles think that usually the council chooses a mate for the ruler, but His Majesty made the choice himself, and Judith is the Lord's daughter. Lord Farger gritted his teeth, thinking that he promised to honor his daughter's wishes and can't throw his words away. Apparently, this is a hint from the emperor that no further objections will be accepted. T says that if there are no objections, they should proceed with the preparations for the engagement ceremony. As they leave, they discuss the emperor's loud announcement. Marquis Esdan congratulates Farger and says that Judith refused to marry his son Caleb. Apparently, the Lord had planned in advance to make her empress. Farger stares back angrily and thinks he'll get indigestion from such nonsense. Judith, on the other hand, is 100 times better than the emperor. He tells Marquis Esdan that even without an engagement to the emperor, he would not have chosen Caleb as his son-in-law. He explains to a surprised Esdan that there are bad rumors about his son. He has seduced so many girls that bastards come to visit from time to time. No father in the world would marry his precious daughter to such a libertine. He tells Esdan as he leaves not to dare let his rascal son near Judith. The Marquis clenches his fists and says that by insulting him, Farger will not keep his daughter safe. The same day, on the outskirts of Isran, Iard was dressing in his room when suddenly there was a knock at the door. His Verde had come to tell him that Marquis Esdan had come. He wanted to meet Mr. Iard in person and say something important. Esdan enters and starts to say how happy he is to see Iard and how long it's been since they last saw each other. But Iard interrupts him and asks him to get right to the point. The Marquis says it concerns what was discussed at the Council of Nobles today. He thought Iard would be interested. The Emperor said that he intends to betroth Lady Farger. Hearing that, Iard tensed up. If these two families unite, the strength of the imperial side will increase. Of course, Mr. Iard will soon take the throne, but there's no need to give additional power to the current emperor. Iard asks what Esdan is proposing. He squints slyly and says he has a great plan that will break up the engagement. When Esdan leaves, Verde asks Iard what the plan of action is. Esdan's words make sense, but the risk is too great, and Mr. Iard is not feeling well. He replies that he will think about the Marquis's plan for the time being, and tells his aides to just wait and not to act in haste. Iard packs up and leaves, saying that he needs to cool his head. He searches the crowded streets and thinks he didn't know how interested his brother was in Judith, so he decided to get engaged so soon. He sees the sign for Camilla's pastry shop and stops, thinking he must be crazy. He tries to leave, but another attack catches up with him. His mother whispers how foolish he was to think he would meet Judith here, how low Iard has fallen. He tries to shut her up, but she presses that girl is betrothed to the emperor because Iard is nothing. A child with no abilities, he is not needed by the imperial family or his mother. She doesn't love him. He brings misfortune to everyone. for she too died at his hands. The face of the vision is horribly distorted, with black holes instead of eyes and mouth. Suddenly, an explosion forms around Iard, which can be seen above the rooftops. People run to the place, but Iard is no longer there, only black smoke. The guards tell each other to look for someone suspicious, and Iard hides behind the wall, thinking what a bad time for a seizure this is. He can't stay here. He's leaving. His mind is swarming with thoughts of where to go. Maybe he should just kill the guards with magic. He can't go to the guild to avoid discovering its location. He is very tired and just wants it to be over. When he hears the heads of the guards behind him, he decides to hide somewhere. Meanwhile, Judith is getting her hair done in her room. Neither her father nor her brothers will be at the mansion today. The maid says they're busy with business and should be back tomorrow. Too bad for Judith. She's been looking forward to practicing her magic. She decides to take a walk in the garden before going to bed. As she walks along the road, she thinks that it has been a long time since she has gone for a walk without an escort. She hears a noise and hopes it is a lost kitten. She walks over to the bushes and calls for the cat, but then someone's hand clamps over her mouth and rolls her to the ground. It's Iard, and he tells her that it's in her best interest to keep her mouth shut, or she'll die. Buzzjet recognizes the man immediately, and Iard didn't seem to expect to see Judith. She bites his arm and, once free, asks indignantly what he's doing here. She sees his face and asks if anything hurts. Judith reaches out her hand, but it's as if he's surrounded by a magic field. Iard yells for her not to touch him. Iard struggles to tell her to go away. He too will be gone soon and passes out. Judith gently touches his shoulder, making sure he's alive. She sees some strange black spots on his neck. It looks like he's been badly wounded. He asked not to be touched, but deciding it was more important to save his life, Judith carefully unbuttons his shirt. From his neck, the stain runs down his chest. A magic circle is inscribed on the left side of her chest, now glowing pink. Judith doesn't like all this. She feels bad mana. It's clearly not a simple wound. Judith realizes that there is a curse on the guy. She wonders what to do, if she can get rid of it. She reaches out to his chest and suddenly sinks into someone else's memories. She feels fear, pain, and injustice. Suddenly she sees a beautiful blonde woman leaning down affectionately and calling out to Iard. The boy was hiding in the bushes. Freya, Theodore's mother, found him. She asks Iard to call her mother because he is her son's younger brother, but she does not insist. She calls to Iard to come out of the bushes for tea and cookies. The boy says that his mother is violating Freya, but she replies that she will talk to Arietta herself. They have to go. It would be a shame to drink the tea cold. The boy reluctantly holds out his hand. Freya is glad he finally lets her take his hand, and the boy thinks how warm her palm is. He looks up at this gorgeous woman and wishes she were his mother instead of Arietta. Iard wakes up and sees Judith lying unconscious beside him. The black spots on his chest are gone, and the circle no longer shines so brightly. He touches Judith gingerly, but immediately pulls his hand away. He doesn't understand why he's eating at Farger Manor, and why the lady is sleeping next to him. He looks down at himself and sees that the side effect of the black magic eating away at his body is gone. No matter what he did, it only got worse. He couldn't shake the effect. And the raging mana had calmed down too, if it was Judith and her ability to absorb magic. Iard realizes that she has seen everything and his identity is revealed. He can kill her right now, collect the blood, and get her absorption abilities. But then Judith opens her eyes abruptly and asks Iard if his strange wound hurts anymore. She points to his chest. There was something right and nasty on it. She noticed that the stain was gone and sighed with relief. Then she falls exhaustedly onto his chest and falls asleep again. Iard thinks he needs her abilities. He's instructed to hide his identity and has many reasons to wish her harm. But somehow, he can't lay a finger on her every time. Iard rests his forehead gently against Judith's head, holding her by the waist. Iard returns to the bar where Verde is waiting for him. Seeing him, the assistant spoke up, saying that he was very worried, with guards everywhere, because of the explosion nearby. Iard says he accepts Marcus Esdan's offer and tells him to send him a letter tomorrow. Verde asks if the gentleman wasn't wearing his cloak when he left, and what happened outside. After a moment's silence, Iard replies that he lost his cloak. In the morning, Judith stands at her bedside and looks at Iard's cloak lying on top of her. She has no memory of what happened yesterday. She only remembers being swept away by the nasty magic, and the rest of it is a blur. She wonders if she's okay thanks to her ability to stroke magic. When she came to, covered by someone else's cloak, the guy was gone, and now Judith was worried if he was all right. He was in a very bad way. It was the first time she had encountered such a sinister force. It seems to her that it was black magic. Judith immediately calms herself down. Iard, on the other hand, hates Theo. He wouldn't leave Judith alone. On the contrary, the guy has helped Judith a few times a lot. She wonders how he got hurt like that. She notices many other scars on his body. She forbids herself to think about him, saying he's dangerous even to look at. She folds her cloak and puts it away in her dresser with thoughts of her and Theo's engagement soon. Judith hopes never to meet that man again. On the day of the engagement, the maids marvel at Judith's beauty. She asks if she looks too extravagant, but they say it's His Majesty's engagement ceremony, and the lady must stand out. But Judith is afraid the dress will be uncomfortable to move in. Cain enters and says that they are ready. Judith replies that she is almost ready, and her brother tears at the sight of her. He apologizes for his tears and says she doesn't have to agree to marry the emperor. Judith replies that she's not leaving the house, it's just an engagement ceremony. She reminds Cain that he has been in His Majesty's service for a long time and should know that Theo is actually very kind. Cain tries to say that she doesn't know the emperor well, but Judith rushes him. She doesn't want to be late for her own engagement. In the carriage, Judith looks at her reflection in the window and wonders if she looks good today. She wonders if Theo will be happy. He'll probably break up since it's such an important ceremony. No one could have organized it better than him. She can't wait to see Theo. The carriage stops, and Judith wonders if they have already arrived at the palace. But something is wrong. Cain gets out of the carriage and asks Judith to wait for him. Cain approaches the soldier and asks what is wrong. He replies that the old man had brought flowers for the ceremony, but another flower vendor had arrived an hour ago and had already left. Cain agrees that this is suspicious and asks if they checked the invitation. The soldier replies that he was just about to, but Cain decides to do it himself. The invitation threatens that the evil Emperor Waldemar is coming to take his own. Cain approaches the merchant and asks from whom he received the invitation. He says from the governor of the palace. Cain shoves the paper in his face and shows that the seal is forged. The old man turns pale and Cain asks, how dare he try to sneak into the imperial palace with proof of treason and who he works for? The soldiers report that the merchant's wagon contains a huge amount of magic stones. Cain pounces on the old man again, asking why he is trying to smuggle forbidden things into the palace. The old man says he doesn't even know about such a thing. He's just making a delivery. Cain explains that a magic stone is a tool that allows you to use magic at a distance. One stone is dangerous, but so many can blow up a palace. The merchant throws himself on his knees pleading for mercy. He made a mistake. He can't even read and really thought the seal was real. Cain tells the soldiers to take the old man to the knights to find out the circumstances. He goes around the palace and comes back. The old man cries out that he has a young son who will starve to death without a father. Judith comes out of the carriage, and Cain is angry that she didn't listen to him. He takes her quickly inside, but she turns around and asks what's wrong with the old man. Cain replies that the old man was trying to smuggle forbidden magic stones, so he cannot escape punishment. Even if the old man can't read, he should have known what he was smuggling. But that's no longer Judith's concern. Judith can't believe that someone had the nerve to take advantage of a poor man's desperate situation. Such scumbags are the worst of all. Taking Judith inside, Cain hesitates about leaving her alone. She reassures him that there are guards at the door and that her father and Lucine will be here soon. She sends him off to work. Let him not worry about her. Cain promises to return soon and tells Judith to take the knights with her if she's going out. Judith sees her brother off and wonders if something similar happened in the original version of the novel at Judith and Theo's engagement. Uncomfortable without the knowledge of what happened before the events in the novel began, she decides to go out on the terrace for some air. Standing on the balcony, she suddenly sees one of the guards being immobilized by magic by a certain man in a cloak and with his face hidden by a hood. She notices the stone in his hand and realizes that someone has infiltrated the palace while everyone was dealing with the merchant, who was just bait. She hurries to the exit to tell Kane. She hears a voice outside asking if Judith is being well looked after. He is told that the knight's commander has left and the girl is alone in the room. The voices say that the order is for them to lock Lady Fargar up elsewhere while the plan is implemented, and that the Emperor's hands will be tied if his beloved is in their possession. Judith wonders what the plan is, and what it has to do with the magic stones. If there is an explosion in the palace, it will be a tragedy, because many people are gathering for the engagement party. Then, a voice from behind the door addresses her directly. She hides behind the door a second before the pseudo-knights swing it open. They look around the room, but don't see Judith. She gathers her strength. She has no right to make a mistake. No one can help her now. Water droplets begin to fly in the air, and a downpour falls on the kidnappers. The drenched knights ask how much magic the mistress can use. One of them asks her not to force him to use force and see it follow them. Judith focuses magic on her palm, and the knight tells her that her magic won't work on them. She replies with a smile that he is wrong, because water is a great conductor of electricity. Judith hits the knights with magic and they fall backwards. After waiting a second, she cautiously walks over to them to see if it worked. The kidnappers are lying unconscious on the floor. Judith hurries to get the stone out of the fountain, where the unknown man in the cloak has put it, and tell Kane all about it. She pulls out the magic stone. It's bigger than she thought. It's dangerous to leave it there. Lucen tells her that these stones are mana crystals. Judith wonders if she can absorb them with her ability. She concentrates and the stone disappears from her hands. Now she has to run to Kane. But then she sees on the other side of the fountain the same stranger who had hidden the stone. She does not understand why he has returned. He suddenly crouches down and pulls out a stone from under his cloak, much to Judith's amazement. She decides she can't leave him unattended. If she searches for Kane while the magic stones are being thrown around, there might be an explosion. Judith needs to deal with the stones herself. It would be more logical to collect them all at once, rather than disturbing the knights and searching everything afterwards. Judith takes off her shoes so the stranger won't hear the clatter of her heels and follows him into the palace. He leaves the stone in a vase, and Judith takes it back and absorbs it again, though it is getting heavy. She lost sight of the stranger and decided to go around the corner, almost bumping into him at another vase. The man had barely noticed her and had already turned his head when he heard a rustle. Suddenly, someone clamps her mouth shut and pulls the cloaked man out of sight. It's Theo, and he pulls Judith close to him, and she asks how he knew she was here. Theo holds out her shoe to her and says he has to follow his lady defenses. He puts the shoe on her foot and says that barefoot she could hurt herself. She explains that her heels were clacking and could have given her away. Judith rushes to follow that man, but Theo says it's none of her business. He wants to take her to the knights, but Judith screams that that man has magic stones. Theo doesn't care about that. She says they can't let him go. The people in the palace are in danger. Theo asks if Judith herself is in danger. Doesn't she realize she's chasing a dangerous criminal without guards? Judith says she's fine, thanks to her ability. Theo interrupts and says he knows there's nothing he doesn't know about her. He wants Judith to be completely safe. She asks, since when Theo has been running around as her doctor, and Judith doesn't want to be just a pretty doll next to His Majesty. Suddenly there is an explosion. Judith turns around and rushes over, but Theo grabs her arm. She tells him that now is not the time to argue. They have to hurry. Theo presses his lips together, then suddenly grabs Judith by the hips and lifts her up, telling her that they'll get there faster that way. Theo asks Judith never to leave him again, for her own safety. She agrees and wraps her arms around his neck, and the man in the raincoat is already at the site of the explosion. He wonders why it didn't go off in the places where he also left stones. Theo and Jude come in and tell him that all his stones have been destroyed. He threateningly tells the criminal that if he tells everything, the Emperor will spare his life, and in Theo's hand appears Rakion. The criminal says he is pleased to meet the Emperor, and then shouts that his power will not last forever, unzips his cloak, inside of which a dozen stones are strung. Judith fears that the man is about to kill himself and shouts to Theo to be careful. But Theo swings his sword and slashes the culprit, blood splattering on his unruffled face. As the knights rush toward them, Theo withdraws his sword and asks a stunned Judith if she is hurt. He holds out a palm covered in blood, but Judith clutches her hands to her chest and avoids his gaze. She starts to say something, but her father and brothers appear and rush toward Judith screaming. Surrounding her, they ask if Judith is hurt. She replies that His Majesty has protected her. Theo, however, goes to the knights and orders them to find the remaining criminals. Judith looks at him and feels that the distance between them is now incredibly huge. Later, Kane reports that there are no injuries, as the area of the explosion was small. Theo asks what's up with the merchant who smuggled the stones into the palace. Kane says that they have confirmed his innocence. He believes he was used to distract the guards. Judith, Lucen, and her father watch as the Emperor asks if everyone has been captured. Kane says yes, and now they are interrogating the ringleader. Theo tells Kane to go back and coordinate the knights. Kane leaves. Theo turns to Judith and suggests that they postpone the engagement date for another day. He thinks that planning anything else for today might be difficult for her. Let her go home and get some rest. Her father agrees with Theo. Judith jumps up and objects. She's not hurt at all. The Marquise Elseth enters and says that the ceremony had better be held today, since Judith is okay with it, otherwise it will only waste the budget. Elseth believes that the criminals wanted to impress the nobility, so they acted today. At a time like this, it is worth demonstrating the authority of the imperial family. Lucen thinks the Marquise is right, but whether Judith will be okay, he's not sure. Judith replies that she will be more tired if the engagement is postponed. It seems to her that the intruders tried to stop the ceremony, which means they may try again if the date of the ceremony is postponed. She thinks it's best to end the engagement today. Everyone waits for the Emperor's answer. Judith gently touches his hand and looks pleadingly into his eyes. Finally, Theo agrees. And so they stand before the altar. The groom is allowed to kiss the bride. Lucene and Lord Farger are raging, and Kane is on patrol. Judith is embarrassed to think that her family is ready to destroy the palace themselves. Theo strokes her cheek and looks at Judith thoughtfully. She asks what is wrong and is afraid that something is wrong. He replies that nothing is wrong. Judith is just very beautiful and kisses her gently on the forehead. The ceremony is officially over, and they are congratulated on their engagement. But Judith has a strong feeling that something is going wrong. A little later at the engagement banquet, Judith and Theo greet the guests. Caleb Esden condescendingly says that the buzzard will now become awfully smug about being the Emperor's bride. He asks his friend if he is not curious how the girl managed to seduce His Majesty. There are rumors that she seduced him with her body, and that Judith is not as innocent as she seems. His friend asks him not to throw such words around. They might be heard. Just then, a grim Lord Farger appears near them. Caleb starts to panic, but thinks that with so many witnesses, the bride's father won't do anything to him. Out loud, he says a polite hello to the Lord, as Farger's fist suddenly smashes into his face, with such force that blood spurts, and Caleb settles to the floor. The friend begins to apologize hastily, saying that Caleb is just drunk and out of his mind. The Lord replies that alcohol is no excuse. Caleb stares dumbfounded at the blood on his palm and suddenly lunges at Farger with his fists. He kicks the guy back to the floor. His father, the Marquise Esden, rushes to him, shouting loudly, "What Lord Farger allows himself?" He replies that Esden should be concerned about his son's upbringing. Caleb Esden behaves like a pig who doesn't know the value of words when he gets drunk. He tells them that they are at his favorite daughter's engagement celebration. Have him take his brat immediately and get out. Farger turns around and walks away, not looking at the Esdens again. The guests around them whisper quietly as they watch the scene. The Marquis grits his teeth in rage and hisses that he will never forgive Farger for beating his son. Judith notices a noise on the other side of the room and runs to her father to see what's wrong. He says that nothing much has happened, but that she looks tired and should rest. She tries to say that the banquet is in honor of her engagement, but her father says that all the important things are over and His Majesty will still be here. Judith thinks about it. She is really tired. She decides to obey her father and asks him to inform the Emperor. Later in her room, she kicks her shoes off her feet and stretches out on the bed with pleasure. Finally, she can catch her breath. She recalls the dreadful events of today and is glad that the engagement was still possible. Judith has relaxed and now she wants to sleep. She no longer hears the door open softly, and Theo walk into the room, then take a seat on the edge of her bed, watching Judith sleeping. She frowns in her sleep. Theo decides she is having a nightmare and gently runs his fingers over her cheek to wake her up. Judith gets up and, rubbing her eyes, asks when Theo arrived and if the banquet is over. She reaches out to him, but Theo suddenly slaps her hand lightly to keep her from touching him. Dumbfounded, Judith asks what Theo was offended by. He's been acting weird all day and didn't seem happy during the engagement party. Maybe it's because Judith doesn't listen that Theo starts to hate her. But he objects, saying he would never hate her for something like that. He just didn't want their engagement to go down like this. He did not mean to put such a burden on her. He wanted this day to be filled with happiness and joy. He rubs his face in frustration and says that he promised he wouldn't let this happen, but he failed, making her see a disgusting sight. Theo will understand if Judith starts to despise him after this. Judith looks around the room and remembers the first time she met Theo in a similar room. She had only wanted to touch this man. She had no idea that he would become her killer and her main love. Judith gently takes Theo's face in her palms, pulls him to her and kisses him. Pulling away, she says she doesn't recognize him. In trying to protect the Emperor, Judith ends up only frightening herself. She asks him to stop protecting her, leaving her in the dark. Judith is stronger than he realizes. Theo may be anxious because he doesn't know how much she can take, but Judith herself won't give up trying to get to know the Emperor better. She asks him not to take it all on his shoulders. They are engaged now, after all. Sometimes it's perfectly okay to pamper yourself. Theo is silent for a few seconds. Then he asks if Judith is really okay, and she happily confirms. Then Theo rolls her over on the bed, hovering over her, and asks how much she is willing to give him to spoil her. Will her offer change if he says he wants all of her? Judith didn't expect this turn and hastily offers only her lips. Theo smirks and asks how she dared to spend the night with him then. He kisses her, then pulls away and looks at her questioningly. Then immediately kisses her again, seeing her acquiescence. Suddenly, Cain knocks on the door. Judith tries to get up to open it, but Theo holds her hand and tells her he's not done yet. Cain stands at the door, but getting no answer, leaves to look elsewhere for Judith. And Theo kisses her again. In the morning at breakfast, Judith is humming. The maid smilingly says that Judith is in a good mood after her engagement. Judith replies that she's not really engaged, but thinks back to last night. It amuses her that they managed to spend the night together and got excited about just kissing yesterday. She feels like yesterday she saw Theo's true face, finally feeling their connection. Her heart was ready to burst. A maid gives her an invitation to a tea party from Lady Leona Glorton. Judith is surprised. She is not very close to their family, but immediately remembers the Marquis Spencer's banquet. She unfolds the letter and thinks that since she has shown herself to be so ugly, it would be a good idea to take the chance to restore her reputation. The next day she arrives at Glorton Manor. Sienna and her mother cheerfully greet Judith. A footman who arrives with her hands the women a chest containing a gift from His Majesty. Lady Glorton giggles like a schoolgirl, thanks and says to send her regards to His Majesty. Judith asks where Leona is. Her mother immediately darkens and turns toward the flower bed where Leona is digging, saying that the girl is doing something she shouldn't be doing again. She calls out to her daughter. Leona hurriedly gets up and seeks out Judith, greeting and apologizing for not noticing her arrival. Judith replies that it's okay. She saw Leona tending the flower beds. Lady Glorton laughs and says that Leona is just a child, deciding to teach the local beggars and grow some herbs. She buries her noble dignity, but it's the lady's own fault. She didn't raise her daughter well. Judith replies that Leona has a great upbringing. She tells the astonished women that donating money is easy, but educating is harder. Judith would like to follow Leona's example. She tells Lady Glorton and Sienna that they have other guests to meet. They can leave her. They object, but Judith says Leona will show her the garden. She takes the girl's hands and asks if she minds. She says no, but looks embarrassed. Lady Glorton and Sienna leave, eyeing Judith suspiciously. Leona thanks Judith for standing up for her. Her mother is against her idea of teaching and has tried many times to destroy the herb garden. Judith asks if she teaches medicine, But Leona replies that she just tells her about useful and poisonous herbs, because so many poor people die from poisoning. Buzz looks at Leona and thinks that in a past life, she wanted to teach too. She says that Leona is doing something important and enthusiastically offers to help. She had thought of doing something similar herself, but didn't understand how to put the idea into practice. Leona's example inspires her. Suddenly, Isabella appears in front of them. Leona is happy to see her, but Judith doesn't understand why she's invited too. Isabella asks what's wrong with their faces. They must have thought she wasn't coming. Leona says she sent the invitation, but they were so drunk that night that she didn't take Isabella's agreement seriously. Judith and Isabella unanimously suggest that they don't remember that night. Isabella tells a fresh piece of gossip about Marquis Esdon's fiancé breaking off the engagement. Judith tries to remember who it is, and Isabella says she knew it would happen, because of that incident right at the Emperor's engagement banquet, in front of Lord Farger. Leona tries to stop her. Judith anxiously asks what happened there. Leona replies that it was nothing. Isabella changes the subject and asks what they were talking about with such interest before she arrived. Judith talks about educating the poor and suggests Isabella join. Isabella shrieks, "Those slums are full of contagion." Leona reassures her that there is no longer any contagion. Since Theo came to the throne, the streets are much cleaner. Judith tells Isabella not to go if she is afraid. Then they will go alone with Leona. Isabella abruptly says she didn't mean that. She meant to say she'll think about it. Judith and Leona look at each other and then start giggling. Isabella explodes. She didn't say anything funny. Judith says it's just that Isabella is really nice. Judith thinks she is very happy to be with them and has never had the opportunity to make friends with girls her own age before. And now she has a loving family. And Theo. She really doesn't want to lose all these people she's close to. At this time in the palace, Cain came to report to Theo. He found out who was behind the attack on the palace on the day of the engagement. It was the former kingdom of Ethelon, which had been absorbed by the Empire a few years ago. The intruders seek revenge for the loss of their homeland. They rally around the third prince who managed to escape at the time. Theo asks if they have succeeded in capturing the prince. Cain replies that he did, but refused to speak for several days, told everything only on the condition that he was kept alive. He said that the case had the support of the Storm Guild. Theo says that if the prince isn't lying, the guild should be in touch soon. He says to let the prince go and put him under surveillance, and if they find Iard, don't let her get away. Again, Iard remembers sitting in the grass and Freya, whom he calls Mother, comes to him. She invites him to come with her to taste the goodies she has gathered. The boy happily agrees, stands up, but immediately stumbles and falls into the water, wrapped in black, smoky tentacles that pull him to the deep bottom. He struggles to the surface and desperately asks his mother to save him. Noda only looks at him coldly, then tells him that Iard has chosen the wrong person to turn to for help. She points her finger at something behind him and says that his real mother is beside the boy. Suddenly, Iard feels the touch of his mother's cold fingers, who wraps her arms around her son's head with a predatory smile. He screams in panic for her to get away, and Freya says, leading Theo away by the hand, that she has shown kindness to Iard a few times out of pity. But he started to get confused about what's what. Her son is only Theo, and no one else. She doesn't need a worthless child like Iard. Then Iard wakes up in a cold sweat and sits up sharply on the bed. He tries to steady his breathing, reassuring himself that it was only a dream. Feeling a burning sensation in his chest area, he unbuttons his shirt and sees that the magic circle is glowing bright red with black spots spreading around it. He goes to the mirror to get a better look and thinks he thought the side effects of black magic were gone, but they're not. To get rid of them completely, he needs to adopt Judith's ability. Iard recalls that it has been a long time since he last dreamed of Freya. Apparently that date is approaching. In the morning, Judith searches all over the castle for Theo. The butler says His Majesty must be in the greenhouse because it is an important day. There she finds the groom standing by his mother's grave. He asks how she got here. Judith replies that she arrived early and was escorted here by the butler. She asks permission to pray with him for the repose of the deceased Empress. Theo says that Mother will be glad to hear her prayers. He says that the Empress was rumored to have been punished by the Empress for trying to kill Iard. But that was not true. She took great pity on him, bringing him food and playing with him often. Theo was even a little jealous. Everyone in the imperial palace knew about it, but when father punished Freya, no one dared to tell the truth, Iard included. Theo apologizes for your gloomy talk. He just wants Judith to know that his mother was a very kind and sensitive person. Judith replies that she believes him. She takes Theo's hand and says that since Freya raised her son to be so sensitive and kind, she was certainly wonderful. Theo replies with a sad smile that Judith is the only one who calls him kind, and she says that means she's the only one who knows the real him. Suddenly, Jude imagined Theo coming here alone every year, and she felt sorry for him and wanted to hug him. She wished she could be with him every year now. They leave, and Theo asks why Judith is here so early, a full hour early. Judith says with an apologetic look on her face that tomorrow is her father's birthday, and she can't come to the palace, so she decided to stay with Theo a little longer today. She sees his frowning face and is afraid that he will decide to go to the party with her. But Theo reluctantly says that it can't be helped, since it's just the way it is. But he has a condition in return. She asks what it is. Theo leans in and says that he wants her to kiss him herself tonight. Judith blushes. She's embarrassed to take the initiative, but she should be glad Theo is limiting himself to a kiss. She asks him to close his eyes. Theo obediently closes and leans his head closer to her. Judith looks at him up close, holding his face, and sees how incredibly handsome he is. Such flawless skin. She can't believe this is her fiancé. Carefully pecking him on the lips, she hastily turns away. Theo grudgingly replies that he didn't mean that kind of baby smack. Taking in her face, Theo says that, as it is, he should get busy teaching her. He looks at her expectantly. Judith can't stand it and wraps her arms around his neck, saying he is truly obnoxious, and Theo doesn't kiss. The next day it turns out that the brothers will not be able to attend their father's party, and Judith is upset. Lucine says that everything will be fine, it's just that Cain is sick, and Lucine himself doesn't fit the mood. Cain covers his mouth with his hand and wishes Judith a good time with her father. Lucine bursts out and says that if Cain gets a fever, he'll freeze him, so Judith shouldn't worry. Her father puts Judith in the carriage and they set off. They stop at a pond to fish, and Judith marvels at the crystal clarity of the water. She tells her father that they have finally gone fishing together, since he always goes alone. He sadly replies that every time he picks up a fishing rod, he thinks of her mother. Judith hears her father talk about her mother for the first time and asks if she loved fishing too. Her father wonders if it is correct to say that she did. Whenever he returned to the mansion after training at the order, Layla would sit on the bank of the pond and fish. He thought she just liked to fish, but she released all the fish she caught every time. He wondered why she did it, and one day, he asked why she was fishing at all if she let all her prey go. The girl replied that from here she could see a man she liked pass by, and covered her face in embarrassment. Judith is delighted. That man was her dad. He replies that he didn't realize it at the time, but Layla looked impossibly charming after those words. Judith thinks that it turns out that her parents also had a colorful youth. She wonders if there will be a time in her life when she will tell her children about her youth. She would hope to have Theo by her side, but she forces herself to stop fantasizing. She can't dream of such a thing. When the real protagonist Cernay appears, Theo's feelings for Judith will change. A footman runs up to them and shouts that they are being attacked and must leave immediately. But before he can even finish his sentence, he is hit by an arrow and falls to the ground. The father drags Jude to take cover behind a large tree. He realizes that it is the Lord and his daughter who are the target of the attackers. Judging by what happened to their guards, the criminals are well prepared. They need to approach the carriage and join the knights waiting for them. But if they move too fast, they may be caught by an arrow. Lord Farger thinks that if he were alone, he could easily handle his attackers, but he can't risk Judith. It's a shame he doesn't have a gun with him. Judith suddenly tells him that she intends to attack those people with magic. She asks him to trust her because she has studied defense magic so that she can defend herself. Father ponders briefly, then says it's a bad decision. Their knights have failed, so the best option is to flee. Judith objects. It's not like she's trying to kill them, just distract them. But her father is adamantly opposed. If Judith uses magic, she will become the villain's target. Farger will distract them, and Judith must escape. Judith screams that her father will then be in great danger. Her father says he was a knight in the past. But Judith doesn't agree with his plan. She grumbles. Then the plan is better after all and stands up. Her father tries to stop her. It's dangerous to stand up so easily in plain sight, as suddenly an arrow flies straight into her face. Iard arrives at the residence of the Marquis of Escalating. Escalating descends the stairs to meet his guest and shower him with courtesies. Later at dinner, he apologizes for the meager table and laughs that his daughter Anna was also looking forward to Mr. Iard's arrival. But looking at Anna, it's hard to tell. She is beautiful, but very stiff, and reluctantly sits down next to Mr. Iard, at her father's command. Escalating looks at them and thinks he is convinced they are the perfect couple. He's been wondering what to do since Caleb's marriage failed. But now he sees a good option for his daughter's marriage. Because if Iard becomes emperor, Anna will be empress, and Escalating himself will have the luxury of being the emperor's father-in-law. Mr. Iard asks him impatiently why Escalating has called him. He replies that today is a momentous day, and he has invited Mr. Iard to celebrate it with them. From today, the imperial family will lose one wing under the name Fargr. He heartily congratulates Iard on being one step closer on his way to the throne. Iard asks what this means. The Marquis replies that the Lord and his daughter are celebrating his birthday by fishing outside of town. Escalating took this opportunity to eliminate Fargr. He adds that in such a situation, it would be good to get rid of his daughter as well. When suddenly, the glass in his hand explodes, dousing Escalating's fingers with wine. Anna asks if her father is all right. Iard doesn't move, but he asks Escalating curtly to tell him again who he is going to kill. And at Fargr Manor, a servant runs to Cain to tell him that the lady and the lord have returned, but he's in trouble. Turns out that arrow hit him in the shoulder. Now Fargr is lying on the bed, and Judith is sitting next to him, holding her father's hand. A furious Cain walks into the room and, grabbing Judith by the shoulders, asks what happened and if she's okay while his sister tries to explain what happened. She tells her brother that they were attacked unexpectedly, killing their bodyguard. She was going to do something with magic, but because of her carelessness, 2 arrows hit her father, who protected Judith. Cain asks what happened to the attackers, whether they were caught. But as soon as his father was wounded, the criminals fled, and Judith was so preoccupied with getting home that she didn't think to pursue them. She apologizes to her brother for the oversight, but he says that getting her father home was the best decision. Judith anxiously asks if her father will be all right. She has never seen him so pale. She thinks there's something wrong. He couldn't have passed out from a couple of arrows in his shoulder. Lucien runs into the room. He shouts that he has brought the healer with him. Lucien runs up to his sister and says how lucky she is to be unharmed while the physician sits down at the bedside. Judith reports that her father isn't regaining consciousness, and Lucien replies that she doesn't understand how a man with demonic stamina can go so long without regaining consciousness. But then the healer unbuttoned Fargr's shirt, and everyone could see that his shoulder had turned almost black. The physician says the poison in the arrow is the cause of his condition. We must find an antidote before the Lord's condition worsens. Unfortunately, he doesn't know what kind of poison it is. Judith shrieked fearfully. There was no way to help her father, but Lucien reassured her. He's the head of the magic tower, and the detoxification spell is one of the simplest. He sits down at his father's house and begins to conjure, but for some reason nothing works. He says that he has a guess about the poison. It is probably poison from the seeds of the Belluna. He explains that Belluna is a special plant that has the power to curse. Its seeds become a poison, and its petals become an antidote. It's not a physical poison, but rather black magic that curses people, which is why the detoxification spell didn't work. Cain says that it is then urgent to find the flower and make an antidote, but Lucien replies that it is very difficult. This plant was not deliberately cultivated, but the demand for its poison was very high, so people plucked it wherever they found it. This plant became extinct in the Food Empire 10 years ago. Cain says it's too early to draw conclusions. If his father was poisoned with Belluna poison, then the petals will be found. Lucien still has doubts. Cain decides to go after the killers. They can't be far away. Lucien tries to stop him, but Cain can't sit idly by. They need to find out who's behind this. With a sigh, Lucien says then to go to the teacher. Maybe he knows some spells that would be useful to them. Judith wants to say something to him, but Lucine asks her to stay here and watch over her father. She's probably the first person he'll want to see when he wakes up. Judith agrees and asks her brothers to be careful. They promise to return soon. Judith is left alone, sitting down heavily, and wondering why the poison from the Belluna seeds has appeared now. In the original novel, Iard intended to poison Theo with this poison, but she doesn't understand why her father was hurt then. Maybe Judith was the target, not him, because she is Theo's fiancée. What's happening is too far removed from the original, so even if Cernai hasn't shown up yet, we shouldn't rule out any course of events. Judith sadly realizes that her father is now in danger because of her. If she had not been Theo's fiancée, if she had protected her father in the woods with magic, her father would be well. Judith decides to make things right immediately, since she is to blame for what happened. She apologizes to her father and kisses him on the forehead. In her room, she pulls a folded cloak from her dresser and thinks, it would be nice if the brothers could find the Belluna, but it's probably impossible. She slips out of the manor in the rain to cover herself with her cloak, and remembers that in the novel, the only place to get Belluna was the Tempest Guild. In the capital, it is disguised as an ordinary bar, but give the password and the bar becomes a completely different place. Their goal is to revive black magic and overthrow Theo from the throne. They are led by Iard, the main antagonist of the novel. Judith hurries there and thinks she can't take the knights with her. They won't let her in. And she can't tell her brothers because she learned it from a book in a previous life. Judith realizes the danger, but she can't leave her father to die. She enters the stables and shouts loudly to Jason that they are going to the capital. He does not understand what has come over the lady. She yells that they don't have time to explain. Her father could get worse at any moment. Jason tries to talk some sense into her, saying they can't go to the capital without a single knight, and asks if her brothers have agreed to the trip. Judith doesn't want to argue with him and says she will hire a mail carriage since Jason refuses to drive her. Jason says he would be sick to his stomach if he let her go alone. He asks her to have mercy on him and stay home. Judith is angry with herself. Even though she knows the plot, being trapped in the body of a lord's daughter, she can do nothing on her own. In the novel, Cernai herself went to the storm to find the antidote. But Judith, a noble lady, can't do that. As luck would have it, she was born into a wealthy family of a lord, but found herself surrounded by the hyper-parenting of her new family. She thought she could just live and enjoy life, but now she is ashamed of her beliefs and tears up in anger at herself. Judith stubbornly wipes away her tears. Now is not the time for them. She looks at Jason and wants to try to convince him, but her maid comes running toward them, looking everywhere for Mistress. Judith is frightened that her father has gotten worse, but the maid says that a box has just arrived from the Imperial Palace, and Judith should check its contents immediately. Inside, Judith examines the box. It has the Emperor's crest on it, which means it was sent by Theo, and she doesn't need to check the contents. She opens the box and sees a Belluna flower inside. Judith excitedly takes the flower, not realizing how Theo knew what was happening, and yells for the servants to contact her brothers right away. And in his room, Iard listens to Verdi's report that they have sent a Belluna flower on his orders to Lord Farger's estate. The aide asks if this was a wise move, since they could have poisoned the Emperor with the flower. But Iard replies that the most important thing now is to get the dragon's power. Even if he kills the Emperor and ascends to the throne, he will be betrayed as soon as they find out that he doesn't have hereditary power. And the only thing that can control the side effects of magic right now is Lady Farger's magic ability. Verdi agrees, but says that pretending that the box was sent by the Emperor was unnecessary. That way the soldiers will only intensify their search. Iard replies that they have been in this place too long and tells them to get everything ready for the move. The assistant says he will do everything, but he has a feeling that the gentleman is fond of Lady Farger, even though he speaks rather harshly. He only hopes that his worries are for nothing. Meanwhile, Lucin and Cain had already returned to the mansion, the magician having already prepared the antidote. After a short rest, my father recovered completely. Later, Cain brings Marquis Esdan to the palace and kneels before the Emperor. The latter cries of injustice that he was just a pawn. In fact, The deposed prince leads the storm. He begs to be spared if he tells everything. Theo dryly orders Cain to get rid of the Marquis as soon as he tells everything, and leaves without listening to Esden's further cries. And Judith begins practicing magical sword fighting with the Empire's chief magician, Lord Lloyd. She misses a blow and then finds herself pinned down by her opponent's sword. Lloyd says that in real combat, she would have died before she could even cast the spell. Judith asks him to fight again, but he tells her to rest first. Her skills have improved greatly, but she should not be impatient. Judith says with a smile that when she was practicing with Lucen, she didn't succeed. She even thought that she simply didn't have any ability for magic. Lloyd disagrees. He sees great potential in her. Judith can't believe her ears. Lloyd explains that she has the unique ability to absorb other people's magic and turn it into her own mana. But because her magic has been sealed away for so long, its circulation has been disrupted, so now Judith is having trouble. But if she learns to control her mana, she will become stronger than anyone else. Judith replies that she doesn't have any memories from her childhood, so what he said doesn't feel real. Lloyd says that through training, circulation will return and the memories will come back. Judith wonders if she will remember the day she met Theo for the first time. Theo comes in, missing her and wanting to see his fiancée. They walk together in the garden, and Theo asks how the training is going. Judith replies that it is going well and covers the bruise she has received, but Theo still notices it and says that the bruises are getting bigger. She assures him that it's nothing. There is no other way after all. She needs to train to get stronger. Theo takes her injured arm and says that he would like to stop this training. Judith says with an uncertain smile that he won't do that. Theo replies that he won't do it because he understands her feelings. When he met her, he had the same feeling. He wanted to be stronger to protect the lady of his heart. He gently kisses her hand and adds that Judith always says she is too weak. Her kindness and sensitivity change people. He takes her face in his hands and says it's not about hurting or killing someone with magic or a sword. It's about the power to embrace others. That's why he fell in love with her in the first place. Judith blushes and realizes how Theo really sees her. She is immediately embarrassed for some reason, so she changes the subject and says that she forgot to thank him for the Belluna flower. Thanks to him, Judith's father is saved. Theo doesn't know what he's talking about. Judith says she was at a loss since the plant was nowhere to be found. She asks how he even knew they needed it. Maybe Cain told him. Theo asks how she knew the flower was from her. Judith talks about the seal on the box. Theo then realizes that this is the same trick that was used in the merchant's invitation on the day of the engagement. Theo knew that Iard was behind it all, but he didn't know that he had his paws out to Judith. Judith gets teary-eyed when she sees Theo's face and asks if she's done something wrong. But Theo hugs her and tells her he's glad to be of service. He thinks to himself that he needs to catch Iard before anything happens to Judith. On the outskirts of Isren, the prince of the fallen kingdom of Ethelon flees with his guard. They are suddenly surrounded by imperial knights with Theo at their head. The emperor says that when he released him, he hoped that Tempest would come to the prince, but no one came. It was useless to let the prince live, so Theo personally came to get rid of the traitor. He tells Cain to attest the prince now and throw him in jail. The knights grab the prince and he cries out in despair. Auction house. In exchange for his cooperation, the prince decides to sell Iard a valuable item that will be auctioned off in a week. Iard is sure to show up there. Theo asks what the item is. The prince replies that it is a gemstone called Dragonheart. It is a rare stone that is believed to hold the power of a dragon. Arietta, Iard's mother, believed that by injecting mana derived from this stone into the body, one could gain the power of a dragon. So she experimented with black magic on her son several times. Theo is surprised that even after suffering such pain, Iard is still trying to get that power. Even though the mother who abused him so much is already dead, the emperor orders the prince to be released. He will attend the auction under their control. Cain doesn't have time to ask before Theo confirms that they must infiltrate the auction house on the day of the event. At the imperial palace, Judith is waiting to see the emperor after a week of separation. He had warned her in advance that they would not be able to see each other, and she realizes that he is busy preparing for his birthday. But she didn't think they wouldn't see each other. not even briefly. All the highest-ranking guests from all countries have been invited to the grand banquet in honor of the emperor's birthday. Because of its magnitude, it takes 10 days to prepare. The guests of honor enjoy the culture of Valdemar, and the noble women of the empire take care of them. Judith is sorry that she won't be able to meet Theo, but she can't neglect her duties any longer. Now that she is his fiancée, she has to try extra hard and not make any mistakes. She enters the room, and her arrival is loudly announced. Standing in front of her is a woman who is not old, but gorgeous, Princess Rodana. She tells Judith that she has been looking forward to meeting the emperor's bride, and that she is more beautiful than Rodana had imagined. Judith replies that she is honored to meet the princess, but to herself, she is amazed at her beauty. Rodana looks away condescendingly and begins talking to the ladies about last year's reception. Judith is surprised to realize that the princess is deliberately ignoring her. Her name is called, and, turning around, Judith sees a dressed-up Leona. She admits that she's a little late because she missed Isabella. Judith shifts and says she's not late at all, it's just started. Leona notices that Judith is not wearing her necklace and asks why she is not wearing it. Judith looks at herself and realizes that she simply forgot her jewelry in her haste. Leona reassures her, saying that no one will notice. But, as luck would have it, Princess Rodana is flooded with compliments about the incredible beauty of her necklace with a huge and beautiful gemstone. She says, with a touch of indifference, that this jewelry has been passed down in her family for generations and that it is not to be found anywhere else. With a glance in Judith's direction, the princess adds that she had made herself look good before meeting His Majesty, but apparently not everyone is able to look after themselves to the right extent. Judith looks into the princess's snide face and can't believe Rodana said that on purpose to humiliate Judith in front of everyone. Meanwhile, the other ladies are maligning her, saying, "How can you come without a necklace? And her skin is tanned and scarred. She must be terribly embarrassed. Strange that she came to the banquet at all." The ladies do not hesitate to chatter that these rumors that the family spoils her are just false. In fact, she is treated like an outcast. It's unbelievable that this girl could become His Majesty's bride. Leona cautiously calls out to her friend, but Judith suddenly realizes that they are not laughing at her because she doesn't have a necklace. They just want an excuse to gossip about her because they are jealous and can't take her place. She could have had her say, but her opponent is a princess of another royal family, so Judith will only add to the trouble if she now starts shaking her head. Judith decides to silently swallow the insults, even though she is seething with anger. Suddenly, a loud voice is heard. Isabella declares that she has just heard something and stands right in front of Princess Rodana. She loudly asks all the ladies if they think they are going overboard with their gossip. Rodana threateningly interjects what she just said. Isabella says defiantly that the lady not only doesn't watch her language, but has a hearing problem. She says that bullying and slander are petty and childish, to which Rodana replies with contrived good-naturedness that she has merely stated the facts. Isabella asks why Judith, who simply forgot her necklace, has to listen to nasty things. Rodana asks in response why the Lord's family is unable to buy their only daughter a necklace. Isabella boils up. Judith quickly steps between them and suggests that the princess take a walk in the garden. There are beautiful lilacs blooming in the imperial garden. You should not miss the opportunity to admire them. Rodana, after a moment's thought, agrees. The ladies are out in the garden. Judith and Leona are anxiously watching the princess and her entourage. Suddenly, Isabella approaches them and asks why Judith stopped her. Judith pretends she didn't do anything wrong and adds that these people will be leaving soon and she doesn't want to cause a scandal. Isabella says they started it first. There's nothing special about not having a necklace to bully a girl like that. Leona inserts that the princess's words were indeed harsh. She too was upset to hear them. Isabella insists that she was right, and Judith looks at them with a smile. She realizes that she has friends who are on her side, so she feels great. She thanks her friends profusely and says that they have lifted her spirits. Isabella says she can calm her anger by hitting the princess once. Judith stops her. You can't use violence. Isabella turns around surprised and says she didn't intend to use her fists. She has an idea. She asks what Leona and Judith are doing after the banquet. In the evening, Isabella takes the girls to the largest auction house. There's a necklace that will make the princess's teeth curl. Judith says she could have bought any necklace at the jewelry store, but Isabella, already wearing her mask, replies that it's too corny. There are treasures from all over the world, so the friends can have fun just looking at them. Judith notices that Isabella sounds like she's been to auctions before, and she replies that her father used to take her there often. But she doesn't want to talk about Lay that way, so she slips the girls' masks. The cardinal rule at auctions is to wear a mask when you enter. Judith hurries to put on the mask, and Verdi shows up behind her. But she doesn't see him. That one, unnoticed by anyone, slips inside and meets Iard. He asks Verdi if he has checked the location of the military forces. Verdi says that everything is fine and hesitantly adds that Lady Farger has come to the auction. Iard asks if the emperor is with her. The aide replies that it's like a bachelorette party, and there's hardly any security. He has a bad feeling, he suggests to the lord. Let his subordinates participate in the auction instead of him. But Iard needs to be sure the stone is authentic, so he refuses. He has Judith followed. The host declares the auction open and informs that this year they have prepared especially rare treasures. The friends sit in a separate room where they cannot see their faces. Isabella allows them to take off their masks. The host announces the first item. It's an old book, but not a simple one. It's been banned from printing because it's too vulgar. It promises to turn even old married couples into heated newlyweds. The starting bid is 100 gold coins. Judith immediately wanted this book. It would be great to give it to Theo. Leona blushes and wonders what kind of shameless things are in here. Isabella says to ignore it. It happens too. And Judith realizes how innocent her friends are. The book has been sold for 10,000 gold pieces, and the host announces the second lot, a beautiful tiara, which Judith offers Isabella, but she refuses. The next lot was a tea set, which Isabella instantly wanted to buy. Soon, Judith gets bored just watching and wonders when the necklace will appear. The next item is a feather that any man would want to own. The center is inlaid with a ruby. Such luxury will be the perfect gift. The starting price is 100 gold pieces. Judith jumps up. She has found Theo's birthday present. She shouts out her price of 500 gold pieces. Isabella looks at her perplexed. They came for the necklace. Judith excuses herself. She thought it would be a wonderful gift for His Majesty Yu. So she unknowingly raised her hand. The bids were rising. Judith was afraid she would miss the lot and bid 2,000. But someone raised the bid to 3,000. Judith's excitement woke up, and she wondered who the impudent man was. Judith tensely considers what to do. Raising the stakes would be unnecessary, but it's the best gift for the emperor. She can directly see him with that feather. The host counts to 5. Judith makes up her mind and shouts that she will give 3,500 coins. Leona worries if Judith is being overzealous, but she says with a twinkle in her eye that everything is under control. The host starts counting again, but this one someone from the audience has offered 5,000. Judith is defeated, and Isabella reminds them that they came here for the necklace. Leona asks Judith not to get upset, but she sits sadly in her seat and realizes that 5,000 for this pen is clearly too much, and it's dangerous for her to compete with anyone else. She wonders who this incredibly rich man is who is throwing around such sums. Meanwhile, a footman knocks on the door and informs him that he has brought the gentleman the lot he won. It was Iard, and he tells him to put the quill on the table. Iard had no intention of bidding, but for some reason he decided that Judith would want to buy this feather for the emperor, and his insides clenched, so he couldn't help himself. He takes the feather in his hands and wonders what to do with it at all. The host announces the last item. He reminds that the symbol of the empire is the dragon, and this gem is created from the heart of the dragon. According to legend, it has great magical power, and this item is coveted by all collectors and magicians. Due to the uniqueness of the item, the starting price is 1,000 gold pieces. Hearing the host's words, Iard walked over to the balcony and stared at the stone. Without a doubt, the stone was real. Active bidding will begin. The host announces that the current price is 5,000. Iard quietly says 10,000, and the announcer immediately repeats his bet loudly. He starts counting down, but Theo, who had been silently watching, bids 15. The stakes grow between Iard and Theo, reaching up to 100,000 gold pieces. The host says it is the first time he has seen such a huge sum. Verdi runs into Iard's room and shouts that the Emperor is in the room, but Iard already knows. The announcer counts out. Verdi asks what to do with them. Iard puts on his mask and says that since they've been exposed, there's no point in bidding anymore. Since the Emperor has the stone now, Iard will just take it away. He searches down the corridor, but there are 2 knights blocking his way. Iard reaches out his hand, and the knights suddenly begin to gasp, entangled in black tentacles of smoke. Iard shifts to a run and bursts into the room where the dragonstone lies. He reaches out again and the glass safe shatters. A voice behind him says he doesn't believe he's stupid. Iard turns around with a smile and asks if Theo thinks he is so stupid and unable to tell a fake from an original. They come face to face. Theo tells his brother that wherever he goes, he does something fancy. But that's how Theo was able to catch him by the tail. Iard asks where the real rock is. Theo replies that he won't say anything so easily. He summons Rachion and says that his and his brother's relationship will end here and now. Iard replies, concentrating magic in his hand, that he agrees with Theo on this. He's sick to death of constantly running and hiding from the Emperor in corners. A fight breaks out. Iard throws magic at Theo, who fights back with his sword. Iard retaliates with another blow, and a blue explosion hits Theo. They remain in the trashed room. Theo says that ordinary magic is incapable of harming his body. But he runs his finger over his face. There's a scratch on it. He says that, as he expected, Iard has the power of a dragon in his hands. Iard replies that with this power, he can attack Theo as much as he wants. He gathers the magic in his hand again, and says that although Theo has managed to stay in one piece so far, thanks to his innate dragon power, it is now useless. Iard brings his palm sharply to the floor. An icy trail of ice begins to spread across it, growing in front of Theo with sharp spikes, blocking his movements. Theo realizes that staying away puts him at a disadvantage. He needs to get closer. In one fell swoop, he cuts his way through and brings his sword down on Iard. Iard looks at his brother calmly, then blocks Rachion's blow with his bare hand. They stare into each other's eyes for a second, and then there is an explosion. The audience panics and screams. Isabella tells Judith that they too must get out of this place, but Verdi is waiting for Judith outside the door, grabbing her and putting his hand over her mouth. And at the scene of the explosion, an unharmed Theo tells Iard, who is bleeding from his shattered lip, that getting his powers is obviously not yet complete. Iard has another attack. Theo puts the sword to his brother's throat and tells him that he should surrender. Suddenly he hears Verdi's voice behind him, ordering him to drop the sword, and in Verdi's arms is a terrified Judith. Theo cries out, and Judith didn't even know he was here. Verdi holds Judith tighter and says he didn't give them permission to talk. Have Theo drop the sword immediately and step aside. Theo puts his sword away and tells Iard that he will have to pay for what he has done for daring to bring Judith into this. Verdi calls for Iard to come up to him, and Judith looks at Iard and wonders if this man is him. Such a scene was not in the original novel. One thing she realizes clearly is that she will get Theo into trouble because of her. She doesn't want to be a burden again, and remembers Lloyd's lessons that she should always use magic from a distance. She urges herself to calm down. She needs to get out of this villain's hands first. Her hands are tied behind her back, but she concentrates, and the magic concentrates, going up her back, to Verdi's surprise, and then pushing him back away from Judith altogether. She's jubilant. Even the restraints have been removed. She should take this chance to escape. Theo runs up to her, grabs her by the shoulders, and asks if she's hurt. She replies that it's okay. It's more important to capture these people. But Theo doesn't let her finish and hugs her tightly. He tells her not to worry about it. The main thing is that she is safe. Later, back at the palace, Theo informs her that the ladies she asked about have returned home safely. She is relieved and thanks him. Theo apologizes for not keeping Judith safe, but she replies that she was put in that position herself. Theo says that she, as his fiancée, will always be a target because Iard's goal is to kill Theo and take the throne. The knights are searching the nooks and crannies near the auction house. In one of them sits Verdi and an exhausted Iard. He is in great pain, as if his heart is on fire, holding his hand to his mark on his chest. Verdi says that they have almost reached the residence. Iard is very angry. If it weren't for the attack, he would have gotten rid of the emperor already today. Theo always gets everything, it seems to Iard, remembering Judith and how Theo ran up to her, that this everything will never belong to him. He recalls how, as a child, his mother punished him severely every time an experiment failed. She shouted that he was worthless and nothing like his father, even though he was supposed to inherit the power and take the throne. His mother beat him mercilessly and insulted him. The servants adapted to Arietta's moods, so no one could protect Iard, except for Freya. The place she was in always radiated light and warmth. The boy wondered if he could be in that light of Freya's, if he got the power his mother kept telling him about. There was such a hope flickering in his soul. One day his mother was surprisingly affectionate in calling him to have tea and sweets with her. Iard gingerly sat down at the table, not understanding why his mother was so kind, but he wished he could do it more often. He takes a bite of the cookie, and his mother says that Empress Freya gave it to her. The boy was about to agree, but then blood started coming out of his mouth. Mother made the servants to not stand pillar. The second prince is vomiting blood. Let them immediately check in this food. Then his hope was replaced by despair. Later, the emperor asks Arietta if it is true that the empress gave her the cookies. She confirms it with feigned sorrow. She says that Freya usually took great care of her child, and Arietta could not have imagined that Her Majesty had so much hatred in her soul. The father, deceived by Iard's mother, accused his wife of poisoning the child. He ordered Freya to commit suicide. Iard did not learn the truth about his mother's cookies until 2 years later. Arietta didn't see it as a problem. She calculated the dose so that her son wouldn't die. According to her, she had no choice. The woman kept interfering time and again, trying to stop their experiments. Arietta says with a grim smile that Freya probably didn't want Iard to get the same power that her son Theo has. She tells Iard to forget the Empress. Iard tiredly asked his mother not to rush him with the fact that it was all for him, and clawed his hand into her face, telling her that people like her should just be killed. Iard killed his mother with one hand. At that moment Theo came into the room and, seeing Arietta's corpse and Iard's bloodied body, asked what he had done. Iard felt relief that no one would torture him anymore, and guilt for having killed someone. Iard turned on his brother and tearfully asked him to kill him. He begged, but Theo just walked out of the room without saying anything. Then Iard grabbed a knife, deciding to kill himself so he wouldn't have to live this life. But the dragon's coveted power played a cruel trick on him, and death became a pipe dream for him, a cursed life that can never be rid of. At his mother's funeral, Iard decided that since happiness had not fallen to his lot in this life, he would take it from the one who had it by birthright, his brother Theo. Iard will make his brother wish he had killed him. At the palace, Theo tells Judith that he has always hated his brother because he thought he was responsible for Freya's death. But when he saw Iard standing next to Arietta's corpse that day, he began to feel sympathy. Theo feels that if he had been more attentive to Iard, none of this would have happened. Theo did not say anything about what he had seen, convinced that Iard had been victimized. Theo thought that after the death of his mother, who had abused him, his brother would be able to make a fresh start. But Iard has not abandoned his experiments with black magic, and has even found friends of interest. After being banished from the palace, he still continues to prepare a rebellion. Because of this, Judith is now in danger. Theo regrets giving Iard a chance then. Judith is thoughtfully silent, and then says that she has noticed something. Theo speaks as if he has done something wrong. It was the banished prince who threatened her and attacked the imperial palace. He chose to remain as he was, despite the chance to make amends. It's not Theo's fault here, so let His Majesty stop gnawing at himself for what happened. She will always be there for him, even if someone censures him. Before Judith can finish the last sentence, Lucine bursts into the room. He heard about the accident at the auction house and came right over. Theo says Judith is fine, nothing to worry about. Lucine notices the Emperor and apologizes for the indelicacy. Judith asks how her brother knew where to find her. Lucine replies that Cain told him. He was very worried, and so he asked Luster to take Judith home. Lucine leads her sister away and dignifiedly tells the Emperor that they must bow out, as it is already night outside. Theo sighs and only asks them to be careful on their way. Judith turns to Theo and thinks that she almost didn't tell him that she would be there for him, because her heart bleeds at the sight of his suffering. Even though she knows she doesn't belong next to Theo, she sometimes wishes she did. In the morning, Judith is visited by Isabella and Leona. Leona asks if there is anything wrong with Judith. They were very worried when Judith suddenly disappeared. Judith says everything is fine. She's glad her friends are safe too. Isabella sadly apologizes. She dragged them to the auction for nothing. They didn't get the necklaces, but they were in danger. Judith asks her to throw away all bad thoughts. No one was hurt after all. Leona supports her and tells Isabella to cheer up. Here, Rodana comes up to them very inconveniently and says to the chuckles of her retinue that Lady Farg has forgotten to wear her necklace today as well. Judith puts her hand to the necklace around her neck, and Rodana smirks and says she was wrong. It's just that the necklace is so plain that she didn't notice it. She apologizes for the mistake and snidely asks if Judith should wear more expensive jewelry in the future. Judith thinks angrily that she has tried to turn a blind eye and tolerate everything, but Rodana insults her too openly. She is already thinking of what to say to Rodana, but the Emperor comes out to them. She asks what brings him here, and Rodana greets His Majesty in a subservient manner and sits down in a curtsy. The Emperor, as if not seeing the princess, walks so close that he grazes Rodana's shoulder hard. He tells Judith that he has dropped in briefly to present a gift. He summons Alpin and he opens a box in front of Judith, in which lies the necklace of the future Empress. The girls whisper in admiration that it will be passed down from generation to generation to the next Empress. Judith thinks he's in a difficult position. If she accepts the necklace, she will officially recognize herself as Empress. She timidly asks Theo to take the gift. She cannot accept it. She is pleased to see such a show of affection from the Emperor, but at any moment Cerny may show up and Judith will have to leave him. Theo replies firmly that he won't take it. If Judith doesn't wear the necklace, it will just be a useless piece of jewelry. He puts the jewelry around her neck and tells her that Judith will always be the person he wants to be his wife. Rodana sees all this and, without saying a word, just walks away. Theo asks Judith if she likes the present. She ponders and realizes that if she gives an honest answer now, there will be no turning back. Judith replies that she will wear the necklace with care. Now she doesn't want to let Theo go either. Later, Theo is sitting at work in his office and is brought a letter from Judith. It asks her to remove a moment of imperial time during the festival. She will wait for Theo at the fountain in the square after sunset. Judith mentions that this will be a date, so let him come alone. With a smile, finishing and folding back the message, the Emperor tells Alpin to release his entire schedule for tomorrow night. The next evening, the maid enters Judith's room and reminds her that tomorrow is the Emperor's birthday banquet and that the lady must go to bed early. The next night, the maid comes into Judith's room and reminds her that tomorrow is the Emperor's birthday banquet and that mistress must go to bed early. Judith is wearing a peasant dress. He asks the maid to keep the noise down. He warns her that he will not be coming home tonight. The maid asks where she will spend the night, and Judith smilingly replies that she has a meeting with His Majesty tonight, but her father will object, so she will sneak away. She asks the maid to explain everything to the household if they pile into her room. She runs away with the promise that she'll be back tomorrow, before breakfast is served. Judith climbs through the same hole again as she did a few months ago, a feeling of déjà vu. But then she'd used it to get away from Theo, and today she was using it to wish him a happy birthday. But just like last time, she sees men's boots in front of her, and then she hears Theo's voice. The Emperor, also in peasant clothes, holds out his hand to help her up, and then picks her up in his arms with the words that he has come for her. He puts her on the ground and Judith says that Theo could have gone straight to the square. He replies that she wrote herself that it's a date, which means he should personally escort his lady. She looks at him and marvels that he is dazzling even in such simple clothes. He motions for them to leave, and Judith talks herself out of her nervousness. Tonight she intends to see this date through to the very end. The lights are on in the square, and there are vendors selling goodies everywhere. Judith takes a kebab from one counter and asks for more royal cookies with childlike delight. Theo asks what she's going to do with what's in her hand, to which Judith replies that she's going to eat it all. She can't usually afford this kind of food, so she's going to eat it all today. She holds out a cookie to Theo. He takes a bite, and Judith has another flashback of feeding Theo like this years ago. But Judith decides she's just imagining it. She gets to the bridge to admire the night scenery and calls out to Theo to come over and watch too. But when she turns around and sees Theo, she sees him small again, as if it had already happened. Theo sees that something is wrong with Judith and takes her by the shoulders, asking what's wrong. Judith exhales slowly and asks him if they have met in similar circumstances in the past. Theo asks hopefully if she remembered anything. Judith replies that she hasn't, but a strange feeling has come over her. Theo disappointedly replies that he understands. Judith sees that he is disappointed and turns to look at the town clock. She notices that it is past midnight and pulls Theo to her, forcing him to sit next to her on the bench. Theo doesn't understand what has gotten into her. He sits down, looking at her suspiciously. Judith looks away and then pulls out of her purse a cute teddy bunny with a box in its paws. She says it was a gift from Theo, a gift she made herself. Theo carefully opens the box and sees a ring inside. Judith explains that it is a magic stone made from her mana. Theo cannot use it to cast magic, but Judith would like it to protect him. Theo thanks her profusely. He likes both the ring and the toy. But Judith says there is one more gift. Very embarrassed and blushing, she tells Theo that she wants to spend tonight with him. She's glad she finally said it. It was harder than Judith thought it would be. Judith looks at Theo expectantly, hoping he won't say no. He asks what her words mean. Moving closer to her face, he asks if they mean that he can touch her as much as he wants. Judith exhales briefly, wrapping her arms around his neck that yes, she wants to eat closer to His Majesty. They have returned to the palace and now Theo is slowly undressing Judith on his bed. He looks at the beautiful black negligee revealed beneath the peasant dress and wonders if it is a gift for him too. Judith playfully asks if he likes it. Theo replies that she is too beautiful, running his hand up her thigh. She is so good that he wants to sink into her, not completely. At one point in the process, Judith suddenly stops a heated Theo. He is frightened that she is hurt, but she pulls him to her and tells him that she likes him very much. Judith promises him that from now on, no matter what happens, her feelings for Theo will remain unchanged. So she asks him to hold her as tightly as possible now. Theo presses his lips to hers before he can say that he loves her. 14 years ago, during Theo's birthday festival, a valet came to his room to suggest some outfits for tomorrow's banquet. Theo broke away from the book he was reading, looked at him sullenly, and said that it was his job. Let him choose. The chamberlain tried to object, but Theo slammed the book shut and said firmly that he would not repeat himself twice, then ordered him out of the room. The chamberlain leaves the room and hears the whispers of the maids, who marvel at the boy's sternness. He has become like this since the death of Mistress Freya. His father is more interested in the second prince, and it is understandable, even though Theo has innate dragon powers. Until he awakens them, he will be no better than ordinary people. That's why he's criticized for every little thing. Theo no longer has someone to protect him, and if he can't summon the crown sword, he will lose his throne forever. Theo stood in his mother's portrait and cursed the birthday party. The banquet is a mere formality, and Theo is an eyesore. Theo remembers his mother once urging him to go to a festival for his birthday next year. She said there would be lots of people there to congratulate him. Then Theo decided to go to the town square. He didn't expect anything from this trip, but in the palace he started to yearn for his mother every now and then. So he wanted a change of scenery. He looked at the happy people around him, the laughing children and adults, and thought that even with his expensive clothes and high status, he, unlike them, was completely alone. He continued to torture himself, but a strange girl with bright pink hair grabbed him from behind by his cloak. She asked him his name and if he wanted to marry her. Little Judith shamelessly declares that her brothers are good-looking, but she has never seen a man as handsome as Tell. If he marries her, she will provide him with luxuries, but in return, he will go into her family as a son-in-law. Theo sullenly asks how old she is and if she knows what a son-in-law is. Judith replies that she is 6, and of course she knows. It means that after the wedding, he will live with us, and he won't have to worry about money anymore. Just let him come. She brazenly declares that her mother was an incredible beauty, which means Judith will grow up to be one too. She tells Theo to think hard about the proposal, but he turns around and walks away, saying he's not interested, and to let her come back for another. Judith stubbornly grabs his hand and repeats that she likes him. Theo is outraged at the tactlessness. Judith peacefully suggests forgetting about marriage and just having fun. She says that tomorrow is the Crown Prince's birthday, and so they have organized a festival in town. Judith happily promises to buy Theo lots of goodies. She is sure they will have a lot of fun. Theo's thinking. He realizes that he's just making excuses and agrees to go with Judith. Finally, he realizes that he is just making up excuses and agrees to go with Judith. In fact, he had already fallen head over heels in love with Judith. Walking along the counter, Judith orders a bunch of different sweets. Theo asks if she is sure she will eat it. Judith replies that she is. Her father won't let her eat too many sweets, so she intends to eat a lot today. She adds that it's just the two of them now, so she bought sweets for two. Theo replies that he can't stand sweets, and Judith asks why he doesn't know how to have fun. She takes one cookie out of the bag and holds it out to him. Buzz says that everything tastes better if you share it with someone. Theo catches her hand with the cookie, brings it to his mouth and takes a bite. Judith asks if it's good, and Theo says it's not bad. Judith is angry. He should have said it was good. They walk on and Judith asks where Theo lives. She would like to see him again. Theo looks at her and thinks she would be surprised to know who he is. He replies that he lives in the Imperial Palace. Judith covers her mouth with her hand in admiration and asks, to Theo's displeasure, if he is the Crown Prince's valet. Judith bites her finger. If he lives in the palace, it will be difficult for her to come to see him. Theo asks why, and Judith replies doubtfully that there are a lot of bad rumors about the Crown Prince. Theo says that if he explains everything to His Highness, he will understand. He's actually a kind and gentle man, and all the rumors usually exaggerate things a lot. Theo doesn't know how to tell her that he is the Crown Prince. They come to the bridge, and Judith brags that there is a magical view and hardly any people here. The fireworks are about to start, and she suggests watching them from here. Theo agrees. He feels a warmth in his soul being around this girl. Judith says she is glad that Theo's mood has lifted. He asks what she's talking about, and Judith explains that all the people at the festival were cheerful. He was the only one walking so sad that it made Judith uneasy. She asks him what sad thing happened. Theo replies that tomorrow is his birthday, and he and his mom wanted to go to the festival together, but it didn't work out. He clenches his fists discreetly. Judith asks why. Maybe his mom is very busy, but Theo says she died 2 years ago. Judith covers her mouth with her palm in horror and apologizes. She asks, calculating the rest of the family, why he didn't come with them. Theo replies that he does not consider their family because it was the father, his mistress, and their son who caused the death of Theo's mother. He is adamant that he will never forgive them. When he grows up and the power and authority is in his hands, he will take revenge on them. Judith asks if this life will be too lonely. She says she's made up her mind. They really need to get married. His family is strange as can be, and Theo is at an age where he should be receiving nothing but care and love. Judith doesn't have a mom either. She died in childbirth. But she has a loving father and brothers, so she has never been lonely. Judith takes Theo's hands and tells him she will become his family so he won't be lonely. She gives him her ring as a sign of her promise, as a confirmation that she has asked him to marry her. Judith laughingly asks him to say his name. Fireworks begin to rumble in the sky, and at the same time the boy says, Theodore. Judith immediately realizes that it is not the valet, but the Crown Prince himself. Suddenly, 2 suspicious-looking men come out of the alley and tell the children that they did not expect to meet the Crown Prince himself here, and that they were going without guards. Theo asks who they are. One of them replies that Theo is a smart boy and can figure it out for himself. Theo realizes that Arietta has decided to target his life as well. The criminal forms a magical charge in his hand and says that he has no grudge against His Highness. It's just that Theo will have to die here. He abruptly throws the magical energy directly at Theo. Theo immediately covers Judith, and there is an explosion. The Crown Prince lies unconscious in front of Judith, but she is unharmed. She cries and says that he should not have covered her. With difficulty, Theo asks Judith to run. They only want the crown prince, and she has a chance to escape and survive. The criminal screams that Theo is about to meet his end and strikes magic into the children again. Now Judith steps forward and covers Theo. She puts her hands in front of her and forms a magical protective field that absorbs the enemy's magic. The criminals look around in shock as Judith collects mana. One of them tells the other to ignore the girl. Her mana is almost gone anyway. She's a child. It hits her again, and this time she feels the blow. She's getting hard. The criminals are slightly delighted at her stubbornness, but they've already been fiddling with this longer than they'd planned. The criminals pull out short swords and decide to just slit the children's throats before people get here. Judith starts to panic. She can't do anything against the sword, and the criminals are already running towards them. Suddenly awake, Theo deftly fends them off with his short sword, putting one arm around Judith and putting her behind his back. He tells them not to touch her. The villain is annoyed that the boy still has the strength to move, but he's probably only able to stand in one place. He snidely asks if Theo can handle them with that little knife. Theo realizes he's right. He can't stand without a proper sword. He looks back at Judith. She didn't run away, even though he told her to, and despite the danger, she even rushed to his defense. Theo realizes he wants to have power, but not to subjugate others or for revenge. It's to protect this trusting little girl right now. Theo cheerfully shouts to her not to be afraid. He will be sure to escort Judith home. Then suddenly, a strong wind rises. The villains are even slightly blown backwards, and the sword Rakion appears in front of Theo. The criminals shout to each other how this happened, since it is rumored that the crown prince cannot summon the sword. One of them swings in with a threat that they will see what this legendary sword can do. Theo calmly deflects his attack, so that his sword is blown to pieces, and he is cut in the middle of his chest. Theo puts a sword to the other villain's throat, and says that now that he has Rakion in his hands, there's no way he'll lose. And if they intend to continue what they have started, let there be no mercy. He tells them to get out of his sight now, if they value their lives. The criminals waddle away, and Theo falls to his knees exhausted, the Rakion gone from his hand. He still feels the incredible power of that sword in his hand, and tries to understand how he managed to summon Rakion now, never having appeared before. Then Theo remembers about Judith, and turns around, afraid he might have asked her a question. She's sitting unsteadily on her knees, head bowed, but thankfully unharmed. Theo walks over to her and takes her by the shoulders, apologizing for the accident. Suddenly he is pierced by an electric shock, and he jerks his hands away hastily, realizing that it is magic oozing out of Judith. Suddenly, lightning strikes between them, with such force that the sidewalk cracks. Magic charges begin to crackle around Judith. Theo shouts at her that she will be hurt if she doesn't come to her senses, but to no avail. Theo realizes that the girl is unconscious. He recalls an incident when the court mage suddenly did not lose control of the pair and started attacking everyone in a row. Theo realizes that Judith is having the same mana surge as that magician. Meanwhile, she raises her head and looks directly at Theo. He thinks about what he should do. It's not like he can stop such a surge of mana. If all her mana is released like this, Judith's life will be in jeopardy. And she's already reaching out and shooting Theo. Theo summons Rakion again and rests it flat against Judith's raging mana. He feels the power of Judith's mana and realizes that if he didn't have the power of a dragon, he would be finished. Judith doesn't stop the flow of attacks, it even intensifies. Theo doesn't understand how she even has so much mana. Maybe it's a reaction to his sword. If she continues, her body will just explode. In desperation, Theo throws his sword away, runs to Judith and wraps his arms around her, screaming at her to stop. He pulls her against him and tells her he won't hurt her. It's okay. He reminds her that he promised to take her to her family and asks her again and again to calm down, clutching the motionless Judith tightly in his arms and letting all of her spilling mana flow through him. Suddenly, as if hearing his words, Judith suddenly collapses in his arms, closing her eyes, Theo barely managing to keep her from falling. Theo can't believe it's finally stopped, but her body is still on fire. He lays her down on a nearby bench and covers her with his cloak. He puts his hand on her forehead and asks her to wait a little while he runs to get the magicians. Theo regretted that decision for a long time. Then he ran to the nearest guard post and collapsed unconscious, barely having time to explain what was wrong. When the knights arrived there, no one was there anymore. Later, Theo searched the entire capital and even the surrounding area, but a 10-year-old child couldn't do much. 14 years passed so meaninglessly. Every year he has come to the ball, but still can't find her. This year he hopes especially, because she should be of age now. He didn't think Judith had any desire to see him, since she still hadn't come, knowing who he was. Theo would really like to see her, so he can't let her go this time. Ott sees through the window as Judith finally gets out of the carriage at the stairs to his palace and puts on her masquerade mask with a smile, and then they wake up together again. When Judith opens her eyes, Theo kisses her gently on the forehead and tells her to go back to sleep. She's awake too early, but she rises and asks if he slept at all last night, immediately noticing how husky her voice is because of the events of the previous evening. Now she's embarrassed again. Theo replies that for some reason he can't sleep. Judith asks why, and he wraps a strand of her hair around his finger and says that she was like a dream next to him. He kisses the strand and adds that he was afraid to wake up and see that Judith wasn't there. A relieved Judith reminds him with a smile that she promised not to disappear. Theo looks at her suspiciously and wonders if she has remembered something. Judith apologizes to him for remembering too late and thanks him for Theo never stopping looking for her. She was afraid to accept his feelings because her heart would break into pieces if they changed. But after so many hours spent together, the affection that Theo shows Judith has no doubts. With these words, she snuggled up to him and kissed him. Meanwhile, in some village, a certain girl in a hooded cloak asks to be given any kind of work. The man replies to her that it's usually monster hunting behind it, and that it would be difficult for the girl. She replies that there is nothing difficult here. It is enough to possess the abilities of a man, and she will not lose in a sword fight. He objects that many customers will refuse her services. If she's looking for a large order, she shouldn't expect much. He asks her to tell him her name. The girl pulls back the hood from her face, revealing her green-black hair and grass-green eyes. She says her name is Cerne Lances.